So what do we want to call this podcast? Just the X-Men Final Phase recap and review, or
what I've got it as is the 20th Century Fox's X-Men First Class Tetralogy 10th Anniversary Ultimate Edition, which is a bit of a mouthful, so you can maybe shorten that a little bit.
We watched the X-Men movies, the one where they're youngins,
X-Men babies.
They call I don't know what they call the second phase, because the first ones are the Bryan Singer, right? Did he do these movies? Is he like executive producer of these or something?
He's definitely got his finger in the pie. No euphemism intended.
Good Lord.
No, I think they call these X-Men Beginnings, but the only place I've seen that is at like Wikipedia. I've never, to my recollection, heard anybody utter that phrase. I just think of them as the first class movies or the prequel movies.
Yeah, no, I think calling them the first. I mean, it's well, kind of. I don't know. They phase.
It's actually the first and second classes, basically.
Yeah.
Definitely, they become more second class as they go along.
Well, I don't know. I might disagree with you about that. Ooh, okay.
Controversy.
Let's talk about these movies. I have some controversial opinions.
Previously on X-Men.
Spoilers? Check. Mature language? Check. Should listeners be advised?
Check.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Marvel Superheroes Podcast. I'm Elite Machine. With me is
Diablo Frank.
And today we're going to talk about the X-Men First Class Ultimate Edition of X-Babies First Class, Second Class, Second Phase of First Run movies.
Quadrilogy, tetralogy, however you want to say it.
Yeah. It's the ones without Patrick Stewart, but he's in one of them.
And while it's my fault that we're doing this so late, we're still going to fix it because he wasn't available when we finally did around the recording. So even though he's the biggest X-Men fan of the three of us, he's out. He had to get all of his nut up on Apocalypse because he's not around for the rest of it.
Yeah, although, we'll figure out how he feels about these after fact. But, okay, so do we want to just start with First Class? We want to just go through the gist of these are after the original Bryan Singer X1, 2, and 3s, they sort of just did a soft prequel reboot, right?
I don't know how soft it was. I think it was kind of hard and thrusting of a reboot, you know?
Well, not until Days of Future Past is it like a hard reboot. But
well, yeah, that's
otherwise,
the second one.
No, I know. That's why I said not until the second one. The First Class isn't a reboot. It's just a prequel.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
By the time you get Days of Future Past, they're actually resetting their own timeline, so you can start ignoring the things that happen in those first X movies. So the ones we're going to speak of today are First Class, Days of Future Past, Age of Apocalypse, and Dark Phoenix.
It's actually just called Apocalypse, though. I think you're mixing it up with Age of Ultron or the old 90s event. Yeah.
And I think I called Dark Phoenix Saga at some point. It's definitely not Saga. Okay, so you people know what I'm talking about. Everybody chill out. We're all friends here. This is a safe space, unless you're an X movie. So when they went through recasting, the big recasts, it's not a recast, it's a prequel. So, I mean, it is X1 picks up kind of your Xavier, Eric Lenshier, Magneto pairing, right? So those are the two big characters that get reboot. You could argue, I guess, Rebecca Romijn gets recast too.
I don't think that's an argument. I just think that Mystique is a comparatively minor character in the original trilogy and is clearly like the third, star in the prequel movies.
Yeah, she goes from a bit character that has some cool CGI and is naked to like literally one of the cornerstones of the entire X universe.
Well, you also go from a model who acts to a young ingenue, early Academy Award nominee, if not winner, and currently one of the biggest motion picture stars in the world, and has been for about the better part of a decade now. So that's a pretty big trade up in terms of notoriety.
Yeah. So we go from Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier to James McAvoy. Is it McAvoy or
I think it's McAvoy.
McAvoy. Michael Fassbender is now Eric Lenshier, aka Magneto, and Jennifer Lawrence is Raven / Mystique. I guess Beast is sort of prequeled out too because he was in those post movies.
Yeah, but you're talking about a guy who was a supporting cast member in one of the X movies to,
exactly.
Definitely like if not a co-lead, definitely the main supporting player in the prequels. sequels.
And who plays Hank McCoy?
Nicholas
Holt. Where is that bro out on this IMDb? How far down is he?
He's pretty far down on the first one, unfortunately, because they've got a lot
Why?
of, I don't know why that is the case. Were you familiar with this kid?
No.
So, one of Paquita's favorite movies is About a Boy, and he's the boy in About a Boy. I started to become a fan of his when he did Warm Bodies, the zombie. I thought that was one of the better zombie movies of the post 28 Days period, in part because it's less of a zombie movie and more of a romantic comedy that just happens to involve zombies. I thought he was good in that. And I've actually enjoyed him in quite a few features. I know Mr. Fix-It loves him in Mad Max Fury Road, for instance. So he's gotten around quite a bit. He's got to be a pretty big star, too.
Oh, he is in Fury Road.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's where I guess I know him from. He looked familiar.
Well, he's not covered in chrome and balls and
exactly.
stuff, so it makes a big difference in terms of how you're receiving him.
Yeah, for sure. Although instead he's covered in blue, but whatever. Okay, so those
not
are
as
the
often
big
as he
players.
should be.
Yeah, those are the big players, right? Obviously, we got all these characters outside of Hugh Jackman get rebooted, but we'll get to them a little bit later, I suppose. Okay, so do you want to talk about? We want to start with First Class.
Clearly, yeah, and it's interesting to me because this was a pretty well received movie. A lot of people attack The Last Stand specifically because they felt like they really dropped the ball. There was a poor adaptation. There was a poor way of finishing out that series of movies, and it definitely sidetracked the X-Men for better part of half a decade. They retreated from the negative reaction to that movie by doing solo flicks, specifically one of the Wolverine movies, and they were going to try to do a Magneto prequel at one point. They were going to try to do a movie about the young core X-Men at one point, and because those projects fell by the wayside, they sort of smooshed them all together into the one project, and they got Matthew Vaughn, who had made Layer Cake and had been a producer for, I think, Guy Ritchie, and had managed to transition into directing himself. In terms of superhero movies, he's probably best known for adapting Mark Millar's stuff. I think he did Kick-Ass. He did The Kingsman. I think he does a lot of those type of movies. And so he ended up getting tapped, and I think he might have been friendly with Singer as well. But it gave him basically a fresh start by doing this prequel, and it's sort of a palate cleanser, and it showed that they could still do teen movies without Bryan Singer, essentially, because The Last Stand really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And I understand, too, that there's a lot of people, I think Kyle Benning has said that the First Class is, if not his favorite X movie, one of his favorites. I think Mr. Fix-It likes this one, too, right?
I guess I should say, after Last Stand, I was like, I'm out on these movies. I didn't really like the first one because it was so cornball. Second one was good, and then the third one was so bad. I'm just like, I'm done. I don't care about any of these characters. I don't like the X-Men to begin with. I don't like the vibe of these Bryan Singer movies. They all look the same. There's just something about them that has always rubbed. The stories are mediocre to crappy, and I just don't care. I mean, maybe if I was a huge Wolverine fan, I could cling to how good Logan was in them to be on board with watching more of them. But I was just out. Okay, so I never saw any of these movies theatrically ever. In fact, I have never seen any of them ever until I watched them over the last couple of weeks.
Well, and I think it bears noting too, the first X-Men movie came out in 2000, and that more or less they had one out at least once every 3 years from then on. And so you saw the 2001, you saw the 2003 one, you saw the 2006 one, and then Marvel happens. And then you really don't need these X-Men movies anymore. And I remember when you walked out of Last Stand, you said you were done. But I think it was probably even easier to be done because Marvel came in between that gap in X-Men movies as well.
Yeah, and if you start comparing any of these X-Men movies to Iron Man 1, it's just, I mean, with special effects, actors, plot, it's not a good comparison. It's just not. Now look, you could argue it's harder to make an X-Men movie because you're juggling all the characters. It's a team book. It's easier to write a solo title than a team book. I get that. But you can't help but do the comparison. And once Iron Man 1 came out, I'm like, okay, I can get my comic book movie fix. I don't need Patrick Stewart, and I don't need, and I love Patrick Stewart. I don't need these characters anymore. So when First Class came out, it was just like, okay, they're gonna just keep doing their thing, and I have no interest in it. So when you brought up like, hey, we watched X1, 2, and 3, we did that in a podcast a few months ago. You know what? It was like all these movies are accessible for the most part, legally streaming on all the services I own. So let's go ahead and let's knock them out. So I had to keep reminding myself, like, look, First Class. What year was First Class?
2011.
2011. So that's our 10 years, right? So this came out after Iron Man 1, correct?
After Iron Man 2, I think.
Oh, geez. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Well,
at the very least, it would have been the same year. And I'm definitely, I know that the Iron Man 2 takes its licks, and we're both have affirmed our love for the movie. I'm not going to put the X-Men movies against Iron Man 2, much less Iron Man 1, especially in the same year,
Yeah, but you sort of have to be, this was produced by a major studio studio, and you would expect that all the hype around the Marvel movies would then have dumped money into these, and instead, in my opinion, First Class comes out looking exactly just like the prior three.
Well, I think
they made no effort.
First Class is trying to recover lost ground, because not only was The Last Stand poorly received, but so was the Wolverine solo movie, and I'm trying to remember if there was any other ones between those two, but those two were enough, because I mean, people fucking hated X-Men Origins. You know, it was a joke. I mean, that was broadly ridiculed. It's like people disliked The Last Stand, but like literally Wolverine and X-Men Origins became a punchline. And so I don't know if they necessarily had the same kind of budgets that they'd had when Singer was doing it. Matthew Vaughn, I don't think had proven that he could handle that big of a budget, or at least he wasn't a proven quantity at that kind of budget. So I'm not sure that these movies got the same kind of money, or once you factor in for inflation, that they weren't getting like X-Men 1 movie money a decade later, you know? So I'm not sure if they had the full resources, although again, Marvel was just getting started, and with the resources they had, they were still making superior movies.
I mean, Google says they got $160 million in 2011 to make this movie.
That was Captain America, the first Avenger money.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, and look, and again,
and one's a team movie, and one's a single guy with superpowers.
Yeah, right, and that's what I said. The team makes it a little more difficult. But I like you. I remember hearing people were excited about First Class. That it was like, okay, let's reboot this stuff, and we're going to get back to a team and a mansion. And like you said, I remember hearing it, you know, being fairly well, received, praised. I don't really know the way to put it.
I was excited about the idea of a period superhero movie that wasn't World War II. I liked the idea of it being set in the 60s. I liked that aesthetic. That was in the time period where Mad Men was one of my favorite TV shows. And so I was kind of gung-ho for it. And yet, for some reason, I never actually made it to the theater. I didn't see it until a couple of years later, I think. So there's some sort of enthusiasm gap there between I want to see a period superhero movie and I want to see an X-Men movie.
Yeah, and I was enthusiastic because I'm like, look, I'm so harsh on these X-Men movies because I hated Last Stand so much. And, you know, we just watched Wolverine the other day, and because I didn't watch both the Wolverine movies. I only watched, which one did I watch?
You watched the Wolverine.
The Wolverine.
No. You watched X-Men Origins.
Yeah, with Deadpool or whatever, where he becomes like the freaking Baraka from Mortal Kombat. Yeah, and I was like, wow, that was not good. It was not good. So yeah, that's where I'm sort of like, oh yeah, no, that affirms my belief. I don't care about these. I'm not missing anything. So I still kind of wanted to see these movies and be like, look, maybe I'm just being a little harsh on them. Maybe after the fact that there is no, you know, they're not comparing X-Men movies to Avengers movies. Maybe I can kind of appreciate it for what it is.
Well, and also there is a element of you're watching several X movies in a row, so you're not necessarily reaching out to compare it to other things. To some degree, you're just comparing the various movies against one another too, and so that's going to temper your expectations, perhaps.
Yeah, and you know, and there is the oh wait, we waited, you know, a couple more years for Apocalypse. It's like, oh man, well, you know what? Maybe if I just watched it for free on a streaming service, and I get to watch because these were all period pieces, you know, 10-ish years apart. If I can kind of watch how that goes, maybe that would complete the movie a little bit more. You know what I mean? It will kind of bookend this little story arc they're telling and make it a little easier to palate. You know, you get invested in the characters. Like, oh hey, I watched, you know, Charles Xavier 2 days ago, and I get to, you know, kind of continue his story and watch the Raven thing and kind of buy into it. So this rewatching had some things going for it. So like I said, I went from being like, ugh, we got to watch these X-Men movies to, okay, I've heard some of these are actually pretty good. I know the back ones are supposed to be not great, but the run times aren't outrageous or anything. So let's knock them out.
You have the chance to become part of something much bigger than yourself.
What do you know about me?
Everything. A new species is being born. Help me guide it. Shape it. Lead it.
Time for the tour.
You have no idea what I'd give to feel
Normal.
You want society to accept you, but you can't even accept yourself.
Should we have to hide?
Tomorrow, mankind will know that mutants exist. They'll fear us, and that fear will turn to hatred.
Not if we stop a war. Not if we risk our lives doing so. We have it in us to be the better men.
We already are.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
They're just kids.
No, they were kids.
You ready for this? Let's find out.
The cost of freedom is always high. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take. One path we shall never choose. That is the path of surrender.
Listen to me very carefully, my friend. Killing will not bring you peace.
Peace was never an option.
So, First Class, it is kind of, I mean, the opening scene is Eric Lenschier at Auschwitz again, right? Which was our opening scene from X-Men 1.
Yeah, they're very much expanding upon the opening sequence from the very first X-Men movie, which not only does it work thematically, but it probably helps to harken back to the movies that people like. So.
Yeah, and I thought they did a really good job with that opening scene. I thought it was great. I mean, it was obviously brutal. And that's one thing. These movies are, I mean, the X-Men universe is darker than the Avengers universe. So there's not a lot of room for jokes and humor because these people are, who would call them these people? These muties are, downtrodden. They're being persecuted against. There's the racial overtones. There's the ethnic cleansing and all this stuff. So it's some pretty dark stuff. But the opening scene was brutal. And we're introduced to...
You have to wonder if somebody showed this one to Marjorie Taylor Greene and that's where the apology came from. Like, look, this really happened to Magneto.
Yeah, she's dumb. I saw it in an X-Men movie. It is true. Anyway, no, I thought that scene was really good. And I mean, it's just super dark, dude. I mean, like, nothing that takes place in Auschwitz is not going to be dark. But when they pull like his mother in and he's trying to force him to what was he trying to get him to do? He was trying to get him to move a pin or something.
Yeah,
they
had seen from when he pulled down the gate to try to get to his mom that he had powers. They wouldn't necessarily know that it was magnetism, but he could definitely have some sort of telekinetic abilities of some kind. But apparently those hadn't been triggered since that occurrence, and so that felt like, well, if they threaten his mother again, that they'll get the response that they're looking for.
Yeah, and then it doesn't happen in time. He murks the kid's mom, and then
which makes no sense because I mean, I'm not a sadist or anything, but the practical thing to do under those circumstances, if you're an evil eugenicist, is you torture her, because if you kill her, then you've lost that avenue of exploration. So I think that's really short-sighted on the part of Sebastian Shaw.
Yeah, but they didn't have a torture room anywhere close. Oh, wait, no, the room next to it was a torture room. Yeah, anyway, but it is a cool scene where the kid's like freaking out and all the torture knives and stuff are going all over the place, and it's a cool scene. Okay.
I think all of his acting went into rigor, though. It's like the entire sum of his acting was be very, very stiff.
He's a kid.
I know he's a kid. He's like 12. He can act.
Oh, come on.
He's no Miley Cyrus.
Look, yeah, I was convinced he was upset when he was screaming and CGI things were flying everywhere. Chill out. But anyway, I like that scene. I'm like, okay, so we're really, we're really resetting this whole deal. So I have no idea where it goes from there. Let me see. It went from there
okay, so they kill the mom. He shows off his magnetism. He kills all the Nazis except for the one who actually killed his mother. And that one ends up basically adopting him and helping to train him to be the mutant weapon that he wants him to be. It's probably worth noting that this character, Sebastian Shaw, who from the comics was leader of the Hellfire Club, in this movie, he's apparently working with the Germans, and he's played by, of all people, Kevin fucking Bacon, who has a German accent for Anne Scene.
Yeah, that was weird. I mean, that was one of the first things when that scene started. I was like, Kevin Bacon's in this fucking movie? Like, I had no idea Kevin Bacon was in this movie. And also, who the hell is he? I don't understand this. But yeah, we do find out later on. Is that okay? So here are my notes from this. My notes weren't super detailed, other than Kevin Bacon Magneto scene was brutal. I say Emma Frost! Exclamation point.
Well, I mean, didn't they do the flashback to Xavier meeting Raven first?
They might have. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's probably this is intentional, where they're trying to compare the life experiences of Magneto, who you have to kind of put effort into making sympathetic, given the things that he gets up to, whereas Xavier is supposed to be the benevolent leader, but he's also this kid who grew up in fucking, lavish wealth, had a match to himself. Oh, mommy didn't pay a lot of attention to him. He had a mommy. So, points there. And so randomly, this blue-skinned girl breaks into his house looking for food, and he basically invites her to stay indefinitely and to essentially become his sister without ever consulting the parents. So I guess they had room, unless she was like sleeping in the stable or something, but they established, Raven essentially as being Xavier's sister, which is not not the conclusion I would come to based on the previous trilogy, where she's, a high-end lackey, but ultimately just a lackey to Magneto with no seeming connection to Xavier. So already it's a prequel, but it doesn't necessarily gel with the histories of these characters that we were familiar with.
Yeah, and that brings me to a point that I'm going to forget to make if I don't make it right now, is that of all the things from the first trilogy that they just threw in the trash, because they're like, you know what, maybe that was cool in 2000 or whatever, but we don't need to stick to that anymore. We're, what do you call it? We're Days of Future Pasting all that junk away so we can kind of rewrite our own universe. They're still keeping Raven naked as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nope, we're not putting her in her comic uniform. She can't wear a dress ever. This chick's got to be naked, whether she's a kid or a grown adult in a serious scene. She's got to be buck-ass naked with some pasties on or whatever, and just blue makeup. I'm like,
yeah,
that's
I guess the scales came with puberty, so yeah.
Right, and I'm just like, what a weird. The one main tie from the first few movies to this movie is that they just keep her naked. I'm like, I don't get it. Of all the strange decisions to make, that's the common thread that links all these movies in one contiguous continuity. Well, Raven's naked. Oh, okay. Well, it's just very strange. Like, you can change the way Beast looks, you can do all this stuff, but no, she's got to stay naked the whole time. And I was just, I don't know, something about that just bothered the hell of me the whole time. I'm like, here's your chance to go back and be like, yeah, you know what? We made her naked because we cast a supermodel and she wasn't going to talk, so we just had her look hot. Well, you're not doing that anymore. You're rebooting these movies, so let's reboot them and put her in her stupid fucking put her in a white dress. Like, what is the big deal? I don't get the hang up there of all the stuff to forget about. Professor X isn't bald anymore. Okay, cool. He's not bald. It's like all this stuff is just being thrown out the window. But we keep Mystique naked in all of these movies, and it blew my mind. When I was like, man, she's still naked. Even in the last one of these movies, I'm still naked. Wow, that's crazy. Very, very
and not just that, but also a key element of the X-Men franchise from the comic books was that most mutant powers developed at puberty. They started out as regular kids with regular lives, and then they hit their teenage years and shit goes bananas. And yet all these X-Men, Magneto, Raven, Xavier, they all have their powers already as children. So that, again, right out the window, and that would have been a perfect opportunity to not do that.
Yeah, or I mean, I guess maybe these traumatic life events can bring it out earlier. So the fact that she was like homeless, maybe, so she's having to learn.
Wouldn't it make more sense though that she's homeless because at puberty she suddenly has the blue skin?
No, dude, they didn't have to introduce them as 6-year-olds. Like, I'm with you, dude. Very strange. That's almost like the director had a daughter and they wanted to get her in the movie or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it makes no sense to me they decided to do that. And again, you're starting from scratch, basically. Do whatever you want. It's just such a strange decision. But you're right. The teenage thing is the theme all throughout these movies still, and they just blow it from Jump Street. It's just, no, that's it. No, she's 5 and she's a full-on shapeshifter. Okay, cool, whatever you say. So we're introduced kind of to the Hellfire Club, right? Sort of.
Right. So and again, if we haven't pointed it out, this is like 1962, 1963. So in this version of the Hellfire Club, it's basically like the Playboy Club, where rich and powerful men meet up to have illicit contact with women who are scantily garbed, including I forgot her name.
January Jones.
Yeah. No, I was trying to remember her character name. Betty Draper.
Oh, yeah, from Mad Men, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I know her. I don't remember what I saw her in, but I don't remember her. But yeah, she's from Mad Men. I thought she looked great. I thought the CGI when she turned crystal was just the absolute worst.
Didn't they use that in the Michael Jackson video from like 91? Wasn't that a transition in black and white or something? Because it sure shit didn't look like anything from 2011.
No, I was like, this is horrible. So just don't do it. Like, you don't have to do it. Anyway, that was strange. So yeah, that's when we kind of put it all together that Kevin Bacon turned from a German, Nazi scientist, and now he's just like unaged 20 plus years later leading the Hellfire Club.
Oh, well, that won't be a theme going forward.
Yeah, but at least this one they kind of explain it. So basically, I mean, Sebastian Shaw, doesn't he do this in the comics? Does he like absorb? What is Sebastian Shaw's powers in the comic books, dude? I don't even know. He's got a staff. Doesn't he have like a cane or something?
No, I think you're thinking of Black Tom Cassidy.
That's one thing.
Yeah. No, Sebastian Shaw, if I remember correctly, he absorbs kinetic energy specifically. So it's like if he gets hit hard, he can take that energy and turn it into like physical strength and endurance. But all this shit where he's absorbing nukes and stuff that they have in the movie, that's just for the movie.
Just made up stuff. Okay, cool. But essentially that's how he's staying young. He's absorbing people's power. All right, he's like eating it and it's keeping him young or something weird like that.
And it's funny too because he's got, kindly, let's say he was for some reason in his 30s when he was a Nazi and this is 20 years later. So he's got to be in his 50s and it's the early 60s and yet he has late 60s hippie hair and he's supposed to be a grown ass man. I know it's a dumb thing to get hung up on, but I got a little hung up on on that.
Wait, say that one more time.
He's got late 60s, groovy guy hair, but he's supposed to be a grown-ass man in the early 60s. So the 60s was a time of radical change, and he didn't look the way he should have looked given the time period that he was in, given the role that he's in.
Yeah, they, I think in all these movies, they sort of mail in the period piece part of it, but, whatever. I think it was more like, let's just get some clothes. It looked like he was from the 60s. Don't think about it too much. So on the other side, now we're finding that, I guess Eric Lynchier's been hunting all these Germans. Of course, they're in Argentina, right? Because that's the big conspiracy. A lot of those dudes fled. Is that even a conspiracy? The conspiracy is that
I think
Hitler.
that's a fact. I think that the whole thing where they were like cloning and continuing to do genetic experiments and shit, that's the fiction. But I think it's a verified fact that a lot of the Nazis ended up fleeing to Argentina.
The conspiracy is that Hitler made it there and didn't die in Germany. That he whole life in Argentina. But yeah, I do think, you're right. The Nazis, some of them ended up there.
And this is funny too, because you take what was going to be an entire Magneto movie, and it basically breaks down to a couple of 3 scenes where he's actually hunting the Nazis that were responsible for the deaths of his family and his internment.
Yeah, and I just thought that it was just like shockingly there was no blood in that scene. It was like a very brutal scene, and there was just no blood anywhere.
Mostly because these movies are going to get progressively much bloodier as they go along.
Okay, so remember they're trying to get information on. He sees the picture of what's his name, Sebastian Shaw. What didn't he like?
I don't know that we necessarily need to get this deep into the weeds. Basically, Magneto is looking for the Nazis. He's trying to find the main Nazi who killed his mom, and killing these Nazis leads him to go to the States to find Sebastian Shaw.
Yeah, except there's like no nuance there. He's just suddenly at the boat at the exact same time Professor X is there.
Much mocked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we maybe ought to mention too that the whole reason why Xavier gets brought into it, as I recall, is because a CIA agent played by Rose Byrne. She's playing. Okay, I think Rose Byrne is Irish, and she's playing Maura McTaggart, who is an Irish woman from Muir Island, who's a geneticist who knows Professor X from the study of mutants. So in this movie, they hire the Irish actress to play an American CIA agent, and that has nothing to do with Muir Island or mutations. So sure, okay, fine, that's what we're doing. And so she ends up bringing Professor X, who at this point is still walking around and has hair. Worth noting too that he is already a professor at this point. He's graduated from, what was it, Oxford that he went to?
Doesn't matter, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, and he uses mental abilities to hit on women in front of his sister, who is now played by Jennifer Lawrence. So she tends to run around very blonde, looking like Gwen Stacy for some reason.
Yeah, and you're right. So she reaches out to Professor X because he's been writing papers and stuff on it, and Maura McTaggart's like, oh hey, I'm with you. I think that mutants are a thing, and nobody's listening to me, so I need you to kind of help me here. It's kind of how it's going, right? And didn't she snuck in to see the Hellfire Club? Mm-hmm. She got down on this whole thing, whatever. Yeah. Let me see. We find out that Sebastian Shaw, to protect himself, was he trying to protect himself from somebody in particular, or he just did? When he pulls out the Magneto helmet, it turns out his Russian pals.
Yeah, I think the Russians made it for him. Telepathy is one of the more common mutant powers, and the whole thing with Sebastian Shaw in this movie is that he's one of the first generation mutants. He's been going out of his way to seek mutants. He's basically a lot like an amalgamation of both what will become Professor X and what will become Magneto going forward. And so he has had a lot of contacts, I think, with mutants. And because he's a provocateur, he's probably had some bad run-ins with some people with telepathy at some point, and therefore he's gotten the Russians to come up with this helmet that prevents him from being manipulated telepathically or being read telepathically.
And doesn't Emma Frost, does she show?
Yeah, she's a telepath too.
Yeah, she's a telepath, right?
Well,
so that's another reason.
In the comics, she was always a telepath. Grant Morrison came up with this idea called secondary mutations, where he basically took some of the more plain Jane mutants in the early 2000s and gave them additional powers. And so I guess he didn't feel there was enough reason for the White Queen to be in the X-Men and another telepath. So he's the one who made her have the diamond skin thing as well.
The crystal stuff. Yeah. I was like, wow, that's dumb. And then I Googled it and it was like, oh, that's her power? Like, I never knew that was her power. So that makes sense now that it became her power after I left the comic scene. So,
it's actually not quite the case, though. As I recall, you were still working at the shop during the Morrison Quietly run. But you didn't give a shit about X-Men at that point, though.
No. Not enough to have remembered a very small detail like that. So let's knock out some more.
Although you did just see X-Men Origins Wolverine, which also featured the White Queen, much younger and probably at a later date than this movie, because she's the sister of Silver Fox, remember? That Wolverine rescues. The whole reason why Silver Fox is working with Sabretooth and Stryker and shit.
Yeah, well, Cyclops is in there too, right? Isn't
Yeah.
Scott Summers in that?
So already the timeline is fucked, and we haven't even started fucking with the timeline specifically yet.
Yeah. It should have just been a hard reboot. Like they should have just started from scratch.
Well,
I don't know what they were trying to do.
Yeah. Basically. Yeah.
So let me knock off some more things I have here. Eventually, what Professor X gets a few of these mutants together. Moira McTaggart takes them to some special secret ops base. They decide they're going to be a team, and while they're doing their team, they're like showcasing their powers, naming each other. And I thought that scene was super cheeseball, where they're just like, "I'm, Adaptoid. I'm Havoc," and I was just like, "This is not good." But shortly after that, it's all like, they're kind of partying and like showing off their powers. One of the dudes, who's this guy supposed to be? One of the Hellfire Club guys. He's the teleporter or whatever.
Yes.
He teleports all of the guards on the base up into the sky, and it just starts raining bodies all over the base, which was like, I was like, what is going on, dude?
And one of those people is the Foggy Nelson from the first Daredevil. Oh no, who was Foggy Nelson in the first Daredevil movie? Because I'm just not thinking, was it Favreau who played Foggy, or was it Oliver Platt?
We're talking about the Affleck one.
Yeah, I think it was Favreau, wasn't it? Wasn't Oliver Platt in one of the Marvel movies before this? Or am I just thinking that Flatliners is a Marvel movie because both him and Kevin Bacon were in it, and so there's no degrees of separation between Flatliners and First Class?
Yeah, Favreau was Foggy Nelson. So
yeah, okay.
I don't know if he was in something else.
But anyway, he gets killed in that fashion. So you're like, hey, Oliver Platt's in this movie. Hey, Oliver Platt went splat.
Oh, it rhymes. Let me see what else happens here.
They come into the base asking these new mutants, so to speak, to join them in taking over the world, essentially. And we haven't had much of an introduction to these people. They've hardly had any scenes. This is one of the only scenes they've had together. And yet, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the two people of color specifically, both of them pretend to join him. One of them legitimately does, and the other one is murdered for trying to pretend like he was joining them. And then there are no more. And then we're done with good black people in this movie from that point forward.
And that was what was it? Adaptoid? Was that the guy's
Darwin.
name? Where he's like taking Darwin. That was his name.
And Darwin was from a miniseries. I don't remember who wrote it, but I think Neil Adams drew it. And it was supposed to be this proto team of X-Men, and Wolverine was on it, of course, because fucking always. And so this Darwin guy was in there, and his whole thing is he can adapt to anything, but he can't take like jizz from Sebastian Shaw and he blows up. And his whole thing was being able to adapt to shit.
Yeah, because like Sebastian Shaw takes a bunch of power and he forms it in like a snowball and then sticks it in his mouth.
And why are you just standing there letting some dude stick shit in his fucking mouth, man?
There's
some really
weird.
Fucking weird sexual shit going on there.
And then it blows him up. And I'm like, what? He's forming power into balls? It was just really strange choices there.
And what killed me too, that actor looked like he really had that 60s look down. He had the hair down. He had that kind of quality to him. And so he's like one of the only guys who really legit feels like he's from the 60s, and he's gone.
Yeah, and like, I should say it again, he blows him up. Like, he explodes this human being.
But even setting that aside, the way he did it, feeding him this energy jizz, what the fuck was that?
So strange. I mean, like, that's one where people like nobody raised their hand and was like, no, I think this is weird. This is gonna those grind a movie to a halt moments, and that's kind of different for me. I was just like, what are we doing here? I mean, you kind of be like, whoa, that's cool, where like the bodies are raining everywhere, and then there I was just like, what are we doing again? I mean, because I was off when you're like, oh, Russians made Magneto's helmet, and I'm like, what? And it's like Sebastian Shaw is like the beginning of the whole X universe. Like, this is so weird.
Yeah. Well, and also they've got they had already moved on to Archangel by the time Grant Morrison was doing X-Men stuff. So he decided to come up with a new Angel. And I don't remember if she was African American or if she was Latina, but she was a little kind of, I think she was a little bit chunky, and she could fly with something that looked more like insect wings, and she spat like acid and shit. And so for a short period of time, she was a new Angel. And so they cast, of all people, Zoe Kravitz to play this character. And this is one of her early film roles. She was just getting started. So not that big of a deal, except that they try to make her sympathetic by having been an exotic dancer and having her been mistreated. And, you get a sense of her finally feeling like a sense of fraternity with these people that she just met. But she immediately betrays them and joins Magneto's team, and then full on tries to kill them in the closing of the movie. So there's your representation in a movie that's supposed to be about a group that that's involved with minority representation. So it's a little fucked.
Yeah, and I thought she looked terrible. Like, I'm just like, I mean, that's great that she's
everybody
a real
who
character,
flies in this movie, clearly it's wire work, and it's really bad, slow moving, awkward wire work. Because she just sort of floats back and forth during that sequence, right?
Yeah, but again, it's just like, you're saying these are the building blocks of the X universe. You know what I'm saying? I know we get to Wolverine eventually, and Wolverine has the scene in here where they're going to recruit him or whatever, and he's all like, "Fuck off." Was that was in this movie, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, we're seeing the building
up to that
blocks.
Date, there had never been an X movie without Hugh Jackman in it, and so he got the one cameo, and then he's out, and everybody thought it was cute.
Yeah, but do you know what I'm saying? Like, just hard reboot this, because now you're saying, well, we can't have Scott Summers, one of the original X-Men. We're gonna have Alex Summers. We're gonna have Havoc being a original X-Men. And it's just like, you're already fucking yourself, dude. Yeah. You have to have Mystique. Just make Jennifer Lawrence be Jean Grey or something. You know what I mean? Like, you don't. Why are you doing this to yourselves? So many questions.
The thing is, they committed to doing the 1960s movie, and therefore you're supposed to be seeing young Xavier, and so this is supposed to be that proto team where they're not really the X-Men, and they're somewhat disposable because obviously we're not going to follow them long term. And so they didn't put anything into these characters, and it really shows.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're marrying this to the later X movies so much. We already know who survives and who doesn't. Like, we know Mystique's going to survive because eventually we get to X1. We know, Magneto, and we know a lot of these people aren't going to survive because we never see them again. It's just, I don't know. We know Beast is going to survive. I feel like we know he's going to turn blue.
Yeah, I think something we have to address too is, I want to say it was during the Chuck Austin run on X-Men where they introduced that Azazel character, because there's a period where I think during the Claremont years where they teased the possibility that Nightcrawler was the child of what is his name, Belial, or the guy from the Khazar, the one-armed demon guy from Khazar. And of course, for a long time it was teased that he was the son of Mystique. And so now you have a movie where you have Mystique and this guy they ultimately said was his dad, Azazel, this teleporting demonic looking dude, but he's red, Nightcrawler's blue. So the inference would be that Nightcrawler is the child of Mystique and Azazel, and that never gets touched on in the movies at all, even though just a rudimentary understanding of what you're seeing on the screen would tell you, oh, the guy who teleports and the blue chick must have had a kid, and it's Nightcrawler, and we're never going to talk about that possibility.
Right.
Getting back to your whole setting things up and then either not paying them off or there never being an expectation of paying it off. So just a weird thing they chose to do.
Especially for a movie that is just like, they do a lot with the blue characters are all like lovey-dovey because they're both blue. And it's like, okay, well, this is from the actual comic book where these two blue characters are supposed to have some sort of relation, and it's just like, nah, we're not going to talk about it. Yeah, really weird.
And it gets you too, because again, you've got Beast as played by Kelsey Grammer in the third movie, and this person, he doesn't actually interact with Mystique. You would think that maybe at some point when they're interrogating her and getting information out of her against Magneto once she's depowered, that he might come into play. But no, they never make any reference to those two having a connection, but they're like crushing super hard in this movie and throughout the prequel series. So again, questionable choices have been made over the course of these things.
Yeah. Okay, so the overall plot to this movie is that basically Sebastian Shaw, this is what makes it the period piece. Sebastian Shaw is basically causing the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? The Russians are working with him. He's going to help them smuggle missiles to Cuba, right? Or he's convincing them to put missiles in Cuba. Am I getting that right, basically?
Yeah.
Do they ever explain why the Russians are so buddy-buddy with Sebastian Shaw, the Nazi?
Well, I mean, I don't even know if they know that he's a Nazi, but he's a superpowered individual who's helping them, with their agenda, I suppose. But yeah, that doesn't make a ton of sense. What makes even less sense, though, is the ultimate goal of Sebastian Shaw is to trigger a nuclear war with the assumption that mutants would rise to be the dominant species once the humans were largely wiped out, which, I guess because he was involved with the Nazis, he's like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe he thought that they came up short, or maybe he thought that the Nazis would necessarily, or the humanity would necessarily go after humanity and kill humanity, so they would have to strike first. But it's all super nonsensical. It's the mutant machine all over again, because we're already at a place in the superhero movies where we're past those kind of insane comic book plots, and yet they take us right back in there again with this one.
Or you can say, he discovered Eric Lenshier through traumatic event, so he's going to cause a mass traumatic event, like something, link it to something.
Well, it was always a big thing in the early days of the X-Men that they were the children of the atom, which they reference in the movie, and that the mutant powers were perhaps triggered by the rise of atomic energies, nuclear energies. Now, of course, in time since, they've backtracked on that, and they've made it to where demigods like Apocalypse were mutants as well. You know, they still call Namor a mutant, you know, the first mutant, sometimes they call him. So they backed on that some, but certainly a core principle of the early X-Men comics up through to like the 90s was that a lot of these guys were being created through nuclear mutations, and maybe they're trying to reference that.
No, because Magneto is a mutant, and this is
So again,
atomic detonation. So I don't know.
So we're back to the why.
More like that was we want to make this a period piece. What was the big thing during the Cold War in the 60s? Oh, it was a nuclear crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we're just gonna make a mutant responsible for it. But again, it's like why are Russians working with Sebastian Shaw? There's no, and it's like they like love him, and it's like, why? Like, what did he do for them? You know what I'm saying? It was just really weird. I don't know. I was like, I don't buy this. This is dumb. So at this point, they're really driving hard that Mystique and Professor X are the two founding X-Men, right? They go out and they're the ones recruiting everybody, like Hank McCoy and Banshee and all these people. They're the ones doing it. They're the OGs.
Yeah, and again, poor Banshee, another guy who was kind of an older mutant in the comics, and agent of Interpol, all this kind of good stuff. And this dude gets one appearance in this movie, and then they never speak of him again. So, we wish you well, Banshee, but fuck off already.
Yeah, and he's like a slacker, sarcastic kid.
Right, and again, another person who's clearly Irish. All of his stories have something to do with Ireland. He has ties to Maura McTaggart and Black Tom Cassidy, and he's just another dude. They pulled a Quicksilver on him where he's just some slacker guy from the U.S. So, yeah. So much for the whole international X-Men,
So then I guess because this becomes a theme through these movies too, Hank McCoy hates that he's blue. He develops a serum where he can inject it into his body to suppress his blue transformation, and he's fallen in love with Mystique, and he wants her to take it so they can both be not blue together, and he even says it's just for appearances, it won't affect our abilities. And then he injects it into his foot, which goes from Beast's foot to like a regular foot, but Beast's big ass feet are his abilities. So like if your appearance is your ability, it does affect you. Like it was such a dumb line. I'm like, dude, literally your feet being able to like articulate them and move them like primate feet, that's part of your abilities. And he goes, it doesn't affect our abilities, only our appearance. Bro, your appearance is your abilities. You don't shoot lasers.
Well, and not just that, but he's a handsome young man with fucked up feet, It's really hard to understand what his fucking problem is, Oh
yeah, that's right. He's not blue yet. I forgot. Doesn't it make him blue?
Yeah, it makes him blue and furry. So he goes from like having the most easily concealed mutant ability of all. He just has to wear big shoes. And actually, when you watch the movie, he doesn't. And now he's got this mutation, this secondary mutation that he cannot repress for, indefinitely. So yeah, he done fucked up. And he does it the night before the big mission to, save the world from nukes. That's a lack of brilliance there.
And he's got like super speed too. They do like this weird super speed scene with him. It's really weird, dude. I don't know. Anyway, so
it's hard too because he's a handsome young man. And if you look at the comics, Beast was clearly not, he looked like a throwback to an earlier stage in the development of he kind of looked like Cro-Magnon or something, right? So you would understand why he would want to make changes, and you could see where in trying to make those changes he would make his life worse. But when he's a handsome young man with fucked up feet, you can work with that dude, and so it makes it you're going to be mocking that particular turn where you should be sympathetic to him.
Yeah, and then what makes it worse is that Beast looks like shit in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
He looks terrible.
Oh god, it's awful, right? He looks like a fucking Muppet.
Yeah, like a weird CGI Muppet with these big like anime green eyes or something.
Well, I know they're trying to do the whole Beauty and the Beast thing, but he literally looks like he's from a high school production of Beauty and the Beast, not a fucking major motion picture.
Right, and it was like, oh dude, like Kelsey Grammer looked good as Beast. How have you screwed this up so bad? And what makes it worse is they're really proud of it too. Mm-hmm. So he gets a lot of like camera in his face throughout the rest of this movie, and I'm like, this is bad. Like this was a bad. And somebody was so proud, and they're like, no, this is it. We dumped a bunch of this budget into making Beast look awesome and CGI. Show it every chance you get, and it's just
really well lit. We want to get a good look at this shit. Let's completely throw out the Corman rule book, and it doesn't help too that their costumes, while I recognize they're trying to go for more of a retro vibe, really corny looking, and it really emphasizes just how blue he is in the yellow costume.
Yeah, it's almost like, and he's got these Teddy Ruxpin eyes too. It was not. I don't think it was what they were going for, but but it's in the movie a whole lot here towards the end. Okay, so let me finish off these notes.
I do think too, we have to mention that at one point they do have to perform a raid where they're trying to capture this Russian general who is being manipulated by the White Queen, and there's all this bondage, sexual stuff supposed to be going on, except all the sexual tension in this movie, for the most part, is between Magneto and Professor X and hardly anybody else, and that January Jones is horrible in this movie. Her acting is terrible, and you can tell that the only reason why she's in this movie, besides she played Betty Draper in another period piece, the director wants to put a baby in her, and she still has the spite baby to this day.
Well, he did put a baby in her?
Yeah, I mean, it's never been officially confirmed, but it's one of those open secrets that the director of the movie, Matthew Vaughn, put a baby in Betty Draper. And it's funny because she's not part of the big fight at the end of the movie, presumably because they're going to save her for later. And of course, we never see the White Queen again, I think in part because she's so awful in this movie.
Yeah, the scene with the Russian general because she's in his head and they're banging.
She's trying to do a Xenia on the top end thing.
Yeah, and she's just like sitting there like filing her nails or whatever on the side. She just, I mean, I was like, it's cool, interesting use of the powers, but it was another one that kind of grounding the movie to a halt kind of a deal. So I'm just like, oh man, like this movie's it's not charm. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of charming scenes in these movies where you're like, oh, remember that scene from First Class? It's like, yeah, where she was like psycho fucking the guy, and it's just really bizarre, dude. I don't know. Didn't care for. I mean, I guess that might be a White Queen thing because she is all hypersexual with the garters and on the stuff like that.
The whatever's in the script, I'm fine with. It's the performance that just kills it because again, it's not sexy and it's not funny, and it doesn't even come off particularly clever in part because just every scene that January Jones in just grinds the movie.
So now we're on. So let's jump to the ships, right? So they're gonna make all these. They're gonna make all these ships like fire nukes everywhere, right? Yeah. And I love it because aren't they like controlling all their minds?
I think that they're controlling the Russians' minds. I don't know if they're controlling the Americans or not. And the boat captain of the Americans is Michael Ironside, and because it's Ham from V and the guy from Scanners and all this other kind of shit, he's fucking Darkseid. You think something's going to come of this guy. He does keep appearing. He doesn't do anything remotely interesting, and Michael Ironside has been ravaged a little bit by time, and he just comes off as a comedy beat where they're going back and forth between the ship's captains, and you keep waiting for something to happen there, and it's just like, no, it's like some Mr. Bean looking shit.
Yeah, and then like they just make them press buttons, and they all start shooting missiles at each other, and I'm like, that's not like when you press a button, because literally like they just zoom. She takes control of a dude, or somebody takes. I can't remember who was controlling these guys, and they just turn and they press a button, and suddenly it's directly targeted.
Right.
Ship. It's just like they're all just pressing buttons.
Can somebody get Matthew Vaughn a copy of the Hunt for Red October or something so we can have some actual tension? So this again doesn't look like it's a sketch.
Yeah, exactly. There's zero tension here. And then what they figure out that Sebastian Shaw is trying to turn himself into a bomb or something.
Yeah, which they do absolutely nothing with. He's absorbing all this nuclear energy and nothing gets done with that. He doesn't blow up or anything. Instead, he has a fight with Magneto, and Magneto's been carrying around this coin with him this entire time. It's probably worth noting that generally speaking, coins aren't magnetic, but okay. And he eventually puts this coin that he's been carrying into the brain pan of Sebastian Shaw. It's not super graphic, but there's a bit of blood there, and it's definitely an element of body horror for this sickly squishing of the coin going through his brain. And I think that opens a door to the next movies becoming more violent. But it's also, I'm not going to say it's anticlimactic, but it's definitely not a raw moment either. It's just sort of like the movie has like about a couple or three endings, and none of them really stick it. They're all kind of like, are we done yet? No, we got one other thing going on. We're not done? Not quite yet.
Yeah, and so here were some more notes I have around this part of the movie. Banshee's sonar bit was super dumb, where he's like falling and yelling at the water and shit, like super dumb.
Well, and it doesn't help that Angel spits his flying ability down to half.
Oh, it was
I can't fly without my cape.
So then there's what was after that? Oh yeah, so Xavier's the one who goes, he's turning himself into a bomb, but Sebastian Shaw's got the helmet on, so Xavier's not supposed to have any fuck clue any that's going on. That was the whole point of the helmet. I think the Angel character does some stupid stuff there, because I have a note that just says this Angel character is awful. Mystique transformed into Shaw with the helmet, but she's never seen him with the helmet, so how does she know to transform into him with the helmet? And the impact from the coin, Sebastian Shaw should have just absorbed the impact from the coin. How did he just put it into his brain? Shit doesn't make any sense. Who were the Russians getting orders to fire on the beach from? Because suddenly they're all just at the beach and they decided to just launch a bunch of nukes at the beach. And nobody told them to do that.
We probably mentioned that Magneto, of course, uses his powers to stop all the missiles and have them just sort of, well, first he's going to try to nuke both of the military forces. They try to nuke the mutants. But there's a bunch of back and forth and that doesn't happen.
Yeah. And then they're sort of all left on the beach. Mystique goes with the remaining Hellfire Club guys, right?
Yeah. So, okay. So, and that's another thing too. Okay. Among these Hellfire Club guys, you've got Riptide from Marauders. And I'm sure Mr. Fixit didn't like seeing a Marauder wasted as one of Magneto's lackeys. But this is the thing we're going to see in all of these prequel movies. And actually it goes back to the original trilogy where they take these really like third-rate mutants and they make them the lackeys in the movies. And I guess maybe in part because Mystique got elevated and they didn't want it to happen again. They didn't want their main villains getting outshone, I guess. But they bring these terrible guys like Riptide into the movies. And of course they're just cannon fodder and they just take up space. And I resent the hell out of these people getting screen time when there are all these other more notable X-people that don't get any screen time. Although it's not a surprise either because virtually none of the X-Men really get fleshed out in these movies anyway. So I would think that the villains and lackeys would either.
Yeah, I totally agree. Honestly, a lot of them, I was like, I don't even know who these people are.
Right.
Like the Zazu, whatever, the dude teleport guy.
And he's a guy who came out in the early 2000s, and he's created specifically to be Nightcrawler's dad.
Well, and aren't these uniforms even from those early 2000s?
They look a lot like, you had the X movies come out and then they modeled the comic book costumes off of the leather from the X movies. And then that evolved a little bit. And so it came back around again where the costumes that were influenced by the movies influenced the movies.
Right. And I think didn't even Beast look like that too?
I think so.
Yeah. I think that was all pulled from that era.
Yeah.
So yeah, none of that shit made any sense.
Yeah. The other thing too is, they're trying, Maura McTaggart is trying to stop Magneto from nuking the forces. And so she comes out guns blazing, and because of the magnetic powers, the bullet zings around and ends up hitting Xavier, and that's how he gets paralyzed. Now, early in this movie, even though Mystique and Charles had grown up together, essentially, it's really clear that Mystique was DTF. I mean, she was ready to go full cock ninja with fucking Charles Xavier. And now he's paralyzed in front of her, and whether he's her would-be lover or her brother, she's like, oh my God, you're paralyzed. I'm gonna fuck off with Magneto now. Maybe he'll give me that good deed I've been looking for this whole time. It's a really fucking bizarre turn in this movie because it doesn't make sense for Mystique and Xavier to have such an intimate relationship for so much of their lives, for that not to be reflected in the later movies. And also, you do not have an arc where it makes sense for Mystique to leave Beast, with whom has already started seeming to have some crushing going on, to go off with fucking Magneto, who she's had nothing to do with, because Magneto's been making cocksucking eyes at Xavier this entire time.
Yeah, the heel turn made no sense, that she would just walk away, especially like you said, the dude has been shot and is paralyzed. And no, you're going to just walk away from it. Was just...
that could happen in between the next two movies, okay? You don't have to have it happen on the beach in the moment,
Totally, man. So, I mean, that just led to my final line of my notes. This movie's overrated as fuck.
Oh, yes.
I thought this movie was not good, people. No. This movie is not good.
I didn't like it the first time I saw it, and watching it again, I was like, I'm mad at this movie the whole time. And I gotta say, as much as I love Kevin Bacon, I saw Footloose theatrically, all right? What the fuck were they thinking making him the villain in this movie? Why the fuck does the evil German have a fucking Philly accent for the rest of the fucking movie? Every time I see him, all I'm thinking is, what the fuck is he here for? He's a total distraction, and not a particularly good performance from him either.
No, I totally, extremely distracting. And
it doesn't help that he do those stupid fucking vibro faces things several times throughout the movie too. More bad special effects.
Yeah, the special effects were terrible in this movie, but again, they were proud of how they were.
And not just like the CGI. Mystique looks like trash.
Terrible.
I don't know, like the wig is super obvious. She's got those crusty bits all over her face. Like, Mystique, I'm not saying she has to be hot, and obviously Jennifer Lawrence is an attractive woman, but when she's got all this fucking crust all over her, she looks so terrible that the last thing you're thinking about her is her being hot. You wish she'd see a dermatologist.
Yeah, they try and make this like she's some sort of like temptress or something in these movies, and I'm like, no, not in this form. Like, sorry, it's not like Gamora where they just put her in green paint and she wears normal clothes and she's just a different color. It's the whole.
She looks like she's going to give you something,
It's the weird, yeah, exactly. Like she probably smells, right? Mm-hmm. Like she's got stink, right? She's got scales,
Yeah.
or blue scabs all over her that cover her, and I'm just none of this is attractive. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not. I don't know. I just really didn't like. And I went into this one, like I said, I guess I did not say. I think I told this off mic. I convinced my wife to watch these X-Men movies, and she had no interest in watching these films. But I'm like, no, these are supposed to be the good ones. And I'm like, this First Class one, it's supposed to be like one of the best. And we watched this, and she was like, I don't want to watch any more of these. And I'm like, honestly, I don't blame you. I'm like, this movie sucked. This movie sucked bad. Just nothing was redeeming. I didn't like McAvoy's Xavier. He was a huge asshole.
No, not in this one. He is an asshole, and he is like this upper crust lad. He's very much. This is a movie directed by Matthew Vaughn, who's done a lot of lad type movies, and he definitely directs Xavier as a lad, and it's gross.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't care for him. Eric Lynchier, what's his name?
Michael Fassbender.
Michael Fassbender. I was down. I think Michael Fassbender is probably the best actor and character in all these movies.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a problem with him, but Magneto's kind of a big deal in the X universe, so we probably should have spent this movie, doing a little more maybe Magneto origin, as opposed to, like you said, the couple little scenes, and the rest of it's Sebastian Shaw.
And really, there's some question to his heel turn too, because there's no reason for him to be so opposed to the other X-Men and so opposed to Xavier. His villainous turn seemed a little bit forced too, and it should make sense over the course of this movie. Like, on paper, it seems like it would make sense, but while I'm watching the movie, I don't feel it. It feels like the script has told this guy that he's going to turn evil now.
No, and
he leaves Xavier on the beach too. He doesn't have to fucking do that. He could take him fucking back to the mainland and get him some treatment, or get him to a fucking Cuban hospital, which arguably might have been better at that point anyway. But something. Don't just leave him on the fucking beach, you asshole. You guys are supposed to be friends. He's plenty powerful enough. He doesn't have to worry about Xavier doing anything to him. So take care of your buddy and then fuck off, But
honestly, it's kind of like that throughout all these movies. They just cannot give Magneto an excuse to be a bad guy. They just can't do it. They're like, he's got to be good all the time.
Or he's got to be bad all the time, and he's supposed to be gray, and he's supposed to be walking a tightrope, and instead he's just going to these extremes where you're like, why does anybody have anything to do with this fucking guy?
Right, and that's another thing through these movies where it's like, are we supposed to feel bad they were going to create a Sentinel program? Because these motherfuckers are giving them every excuse possible to create the Sentinels. I'm like, no, that legislation should have been passed through unanimously a long time ago, because these fools are just tripping over atomic bombs and worldwide incidents, and so it's just. But no, I'm glad you brought that up. The way he leaves him on the beach, it's like, I'm telling you, it's just like this the whole way. I know he's supposed to be gray, but he's never really gray. He's always just like a really lovable ally of the X-Men,
or a complete bastard.
Some horrifically terrible shit, and you're like, what? I don't know. He's supposed to be like the snake you're afraid to poke. Not, let's just call Eric again. He'll be down. Cool.
Hey,
and they call him, and suddenly he's a good guy again.
Let me throw a name at you. Loki.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He's supposed to be fucking Loki, and instead he's just whatever the fuck the script needs him to be from scene to scene.
Yeah, and it's almost like...
Or you know what? Let me throw another name at you too. Eric Killmonger. He should be maybe one of these guys where he has a consistent ideology, and you may not agree with his application of that sometimes, and he may show signs of sociopathy, but in some ways he's kind of right, and so you would understand why people would be sympathetic to him.
Yeah, it's he and Xavier have two ultimately same views of where they want to get to. They're just taking different paths to kind of get there. In this, none of that is ever in any of these movies. It's never developed. They never develop Magneto, in my opinion, the way he's supposed to be. And I think we talked about this in a prior podcast. It might have been from the first trilogy we talked about that. Magneto, you're supposed to have the Thanos thought when you think of Magneto, or like you said with Eric Killmonger, where you're like, I mean, the way he's going about it is wrong, but ultimately he's kind of got some points. You know what I mean? Where we do just exponentially populate areas and just destroy everything. We put concrete on everything, and suddenly we have food shortages, and it's just we just populate. Nobody ever, that kind of thing. Like, you're supposed to show me the demented reasoning behind Eric Lynchier and how his life has just took Xavier and him on the same path and just cock him off just a little bit, and then over time they're so far apart, even though they're like when you nudge something that's far away, next thing you know it's miles off as you go down the road. That's kind of what you're supposed to be doing, and they just completely fail miserably at this throughout all these movies. And really, while I was watching this movie, I was thinking to myself, why is Magneto not Sebastian Shaw in this?
Well, I mean, they make a point of showing that he is simpatico with Sebastian Shaw. He is the product of that experience, and they're trying to say that he's kind of followed in Sebastian Shaw's footsteps, except he can't even do that consistently. Because say what you will about Sebastian Shaw, he's a nut job, he's a homicidal maniac, but at least that character is consistent within this movie, where Magneto is all over the fucking place throughout all the movies with Fassbender, at least. I would say that he's pretty consistent in the portrayal by Gandalf, but not under Fassbender.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally. Okay, so this movie, not so good.
Yeah, this is a bad movie. This isn't even bad by like, oh, it's bad because it's not as good as a Marvel movie. I mean, for an X-Men movie, I think this is bad. And there's some pretty fucking bad X-Men movies.
Yeah, I mean, X1 and X2 are both better than this movie. I'm not even close. I don't think it's even close. I mean, X1's kind of in some spots, but I think X1's got a little bit of the heart that you don't get in this movie. That, you know what I mean? It's got a little bit of charm to it. This movie is just,
well, and I like the actors and the performances, at least some of them, you know, where with this movie, the only actor I legitimately like going into this movie is Rose Byrne. I just like that actress. I like her whole vibe. I've enjoyed her in a bunch of movies. And she never spoils it for me over this movie. Virtually everybody else in this movie does something to piss me off during the course of the movie or just fails to impress me in any way. And so at the end of that, she's the only person in this movie that I like leaving the movie. And of course, they give her the fucking Lois Lane mindfuck, which if I wasn't already opposed to Xavier, him doing that should have done the job, you know?
Yeah, and that's the theme of these movies, is that like we know they touched on it in what was the Last Stand?
Okay.
They touch on it in Last Stand that Xavier is he's done some questionable things to Jean Grey, right? Mm-hmm. They touch on it there. These 4 movies are all about Xavier stepping way out of his bounds for his entire career. Like, not like he's a habitual line stepper when it comes to messing with people's brains and memories. And every time you think kind of learns his lesson, he's just doing it all over again. I mean, we'll touch.
He's an oppressive patriarch for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's always been a weird part of Xavier they've touched on in the comic books. But these movies, it's like the theme of these movies in a lot of ways. It's the theme of these movies is how Xavier, I don't want to call him the villain, but
the arc of his story, particularly in the prequels, is corruption.
Yeah. No, totally. Just very, very, and it's like off-putting. It's really off-putting for the character who, like, I think Patrick Stewart. Everybody loved Patrick Stewart in the first X-Men movies, where it's like I don't ever see how this guy becomes that guy. Like I don't see it, and I feel like by the end,
I'm not sure if I agree with that. But we'll get into that in kind of the later movies. I definitely, as a young man, as a fresh graduate of a doctoral program, I can kind of see where he would, become more sober over the course of his years. So I can see, even at this point, how he would eventually become Xavier. But he's kind of a douche at this point, and I think that makes sense for him as well. I mean, I definitely look back at my own life and be like, wow, I was a douche back then. And so I can see where he would be contrite by the time he is Picard's age.
Yeah, except that these movies take place over like 40 fucking years.
Right.
And he's doing it for all 4 movies.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. This movie is more forgivable for that being the case. Whereas the movies progress, he does almost become a villainous presence.
Right. So he's the villainous presence for 4 whole movies in a lot of ways. Whereas Patrick Stewart was the Xavier we know for like 2.5. It's just like, I don't know. He spends more time being a shithead than not. And that's what I have issue with. Okay, so let's talk about Days of Future Past.
So many battles waged over the years. And yet, none of them like this. Are we destined to destroy each other? Or can we change who we are and unite? Is the future truly set? Mutants, we now find ourselves on the edge of extinction. You'll need to go into the past to end this war before it ever begins.
Use your power. Bring the X-Men together.
It's going to take the 2 of us, side by side at a time when we couldn't be further apart.
You took the things that mean the most to me.
Maybe you should have fought harder for them.
There is a new enemy out there. Mutants. You'll need a new weapon for this war.
I know what I have to do. It's us or them.
years wasted fighting each other, Charles.
I've watched a lot of people die. Friends.
We've been given a second chance.
Guide us. Lead us.
I don't want your future! We were supposed to protect them!
You're afraid. I remember.
This one was released in 2014, and again, it was one that I had enthusiasm about, when it was coming out. I don't know if I'd seen First Class by that point yet, and that might explain why I didn't see it theatrically, but I just didn't. But another thing I checked on is this one came out around the same time as, like, Captain America, the First Avenger, a little bit before that. And I was already trying to prepare for the podcast at that point. And, when we were launching the show, I was trying to get together enough to do it in time for Captain America, the First Avenger to be the first episode of the podcast. Was that right? No. I'm mistaken. I'm thinking about the Winter Soldier. I was trying to get it out in time for the Winter Soldier, I think it was. And so the movie came out a few months before we launched the podcast. And obviously that would have been a ton of baggage, and we could not have launched the podcast on X-Men Days of Future Past. And so for whatever reason, I just didn't see it theatrically. And I finally caught it on a plane ride. It was playing in on a plane during an international flight. And that's when I finally got to see the thing, and I was extremely impressed. While I was watching it unfold, I was thinking, this is actually a legitimately great movie. This is like maybe the best X-Men movie I'm watching right here. And so I was really into it when the movie was first getting started. Now, you were coming into it, you just saw this movie this month. How did you feel going into Days of Future Past after having seen First Class?
Okay, it was...
As far as did you manage to talk your wife into watching it too?
Yeah, it was that, okay, wait, I was wrong. The next one's supposed to be the good one. And she's like, all right, I'll give you one more. And again, the run times on these movies aren't crazy, so you know what, I can get her to buy into a couple hour movie. It's not that big of a deal.
This one's has a lot going on, and they still managed to get it in like 2:11, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. I think that's like full run time, which means that's with credits and stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's we're coming to like 2:05 probably.
Virtually no Marvel movies come in at under like 2:10, 2:20. I think all of them run at least that long these days.
Yeah, let alone time spanning
cast
team
spanning
movies, right?
Yeah, because it's a really interesting scenario because it's the second movie in the First Class series where you're featuring the recast versions of Magneto, Mystique, Xavier, but it's also the fourth movie in the original trilogy, but it's also a prequel to those movies, but it also features the same cast members, so there's a lot to unpack with this thing. I also think it's worth noting too that we somehow managed to have 4 movies in each series, because since this was an epilogue to the original trilogy, and that this was an interstitial as part of the other trilogy, I don't know if there's ever been a movie quite like this where there's so many different things folded into the one movie,
You're wrong. Star Trek Generations, homie. Another Patrick Stewart joint. It's the same thing.
It's really not.
Yes, it is. It's the same
They only
thing.
have Kirk.
Captain Kirk. Yeah, well, come on, it's fine. It's Captain Kirk.
Captain Kirk has a guest appearance in a bad episode of Next Generation. That's all that shit was.
It's the same. I'm saying.
It absolutely is not.
It's the same. Oh, it's the same thing. They're taking an old and they're combining it with a new, and it's the same thing. And they both got Patrick Stewart in it. I like it. I just thought of that right now. Let's just end the podcast right now. That was great. Okay, so I don't know where you're going with that. Yeah, it's probably you're right. Whatever. Blah blah blah. First time doing something like this. Yeah, that's great. Very ambitious. I agree. Lots of actors, lots of continuity they're driving around. But let's just say the whole point of this movie is to kind of full on reboot this First Class universe, right?
Well, X-Men in total. But a side effect is that they do essentially reboot the First Class as well, because almost none of them motherfuckers come back.
Yeah, exactly. Sit there. Okay, so we've talked about all the actors in this movie, basically. I don't really know if we don't really need to go into that. We kind of just talk quick synopsis, right?
Well, I mean,
this movie's got a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I guess basically the overall theme of what's going on is this is our Days of Future Past future where the Sentinels are wiping out X-Men.
Which in and of itself is another precarious proposition, because they already tried to adapt the Dark Phoenix saga saga and just absolutely shit the bed. So it's like, okay, well, we'll go to the second most revered story arc in X-Men history. Let's see how this one plays out.
Yeah, let's try this one and put it in a 2-hour movie and see if we can get the gist of it. But basically, well, it opens. We got Blink, Colossus, Shadowcat, Iceman, and it's Iceman and Shadowcat from the original movies, right? Warpath, and is it Sunspot? That guy? Is he supposed to be Sunspot?
Yeah, Sunspot's in there. Bishop's in there. If you hadn't already mentioned him, Blink, of course, is one of the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're basically doing this thing. So explain this to me one more time, maybe. I mean, I kind of got the gist of what was going on, but they're able to see a couple days in the future so that they know where the Sentinels are going to be.
Okay, so in the original stories, what happens is that because Kitty Pryde is a child who at that point had just joined the X-Men and she was a precursor to the New Mutants. She's I think a 14-year-old at that time. So in the far future, when mutants have experienced a Holocaust scenario, she's one of the only people that's alive to that point in time. And so the daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, the modern Phoenix, who of course inherits some of her mother's extraordinary power, and of course this is happening after the Dark Phoenix saga, so you're left wondering, how could this character even exist? Because Jean Grey is dead at the end of that story. How could she have a daughter? But you have the inference that this is a being of an extraordinary power, and that's probably the reason why this person is still alive when so few X-Men are left after the Sentinels have hunted them to near extinction. So she's powerful enough to send the consciousness of Kitty Pryde backward in time so that the adult Catherine Pryde can act to stop an event that will occur that leads to this Holocaust in her young herself. So it's very much Trancers, except Trancers didn't exist yet. It's very much the Terminator, except the Terminator doesn't exist yet. Now, most probably they're all stealing from a similar source. As you recall, Harlan Ellison successfully sued the Terminator franchise for story credit because he felt that so many elements of his stories were taken to create the Terminator, and Claremont was probably reading those same stories and getting it from there. But still, in terms of broader popular culture outside of sci-fi circles, this is very much a genesis point for a lot of stories, and frankly, probably a lot of those people read the comic book as opposed to reading the Harlan Ellison story, right? Right. So in this movie, they have Kitty Pryde have the power of Phoenix, and she's casting Wolverine's mind backward, and so elements of that make sense, but it's mostly just because they'd already cast Ellen Page in The Last Stand and probably still had her under contract after she'd become a more popular actress, and so they decided to recycle her instead and keep the Kitty Pryde connection through her being the one who has the power to send Wolverine's consciousness back in time instead. And of course, the whole point is to stop Mystique from executing a powerful political figure. In the original comics, it was Senator Kelly, who was the senator who dies in the first X-Men movie, and then Mystique takes his place. But because they've already killed that character off, in this version, it's Trask, except instead of being played by a large, bald black man in Bill Duke, is played by a small hirsute man in Peter Dinklage. But again, the continuity in these movies is absolutely fucked, and that joke has been made so many times, no sense in me laboring it.
Right, and so she's been using this power, right, to look forward a couple days, and they know where the Sentinels are going to be, so they hang out there right until the Sentinels are going to show up, and then they bounce, right? That's kind of what they're doing. And that's how they've managed to stay alive all this time.
Exactly. And it gives us an opportunity to see the massacre of the mutants, which was one of the big selling points of the original story, was you've got this cover that declares that in this issue, the X-Men die, and we get to see that, but then we don't let it fuck up the story we're trying to tell either. So we get our bread and we eat it too, or cake and eat it too.
Yeah, and it should be known that, or at least, I don't know if it should be known, you may not agree with me. I feel like this movie, the special effects finally step up to be like, maybe not Marvel par, but close. Whereas the other movies are like complete joke, like it's laughably bad, like really
yeah, bad. Again, the first time I saw this movie, I'm watching it on like a 4-inch screen, and so I'm perhaps not the best of judges at that time, but watching it, I felt like Bryan Singer came back, and he'd had successes between the first two X-Men movies and this movie, but he'd also, had his Joel Schumacher moment by leaving to go do Superman Returns, which is a movie that very few people have a great affection for. And so I got the impression that when he came back to the X-Men, he had something to prove. He wanted to bring the X-Men into the 20-teens, and so he put a lot of effects on the screen. He put a lot of oomph out there. The sequences set in the future with the Sentinels are visually dazzling. He's doing a lot more with the camera as well, and so you definitely get the sense that this is, Bryan Singer 2.0, this is X-Men 2.0. They've leveled up into where they need to be to compete with the modern superhero movies.
Yeah, and then, again, that makes sense, and I think it shows. It shows big time. So that was refreshing, because there's a lot of CGI in the first opening couple scenes. I'm like, okay, this is at least not going to be like diarrhea the whole time. I'm at least I can look at this movie and it's not so bad.
Yeah, well, and especially coming off the Matthew, as we just discussed, while Matthew Vaughn is a director that people are aware of and has done a lot of these, reasonably high budget action movies and superhero stuff, I really feel like in terms of just raw directing ability, he was the worst director of the core X-Men franchise. And so coming off of him, like just kind of bumblefucking his way through a movie, to have a director of Bryan Singer's caliber, and I know he's disgraced. We probably never will see another Bryan Singer movie again, but he has made some truly noteworthy films. I think The Usual Suspects is one of my all-time favorite movies. And so he has the capacity to do more with these films than anybody else who's worked on these franchises because he's Bryan Singer. And that still means something, or it definitely meant something at that time. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, and again, like you said, it shows in this movie. And it does definitely have a, I'm back feel to it. And also, it doesn't hurt that the OG cast that I think everybody kind of like. Say what you want about the first 3 X-Men movies and what they kind of failed to do for the superhero genre that maybe the Marvel movies did better. I think everybody, for the most part, likes the key cast. Famke Janssen, the dude that played
maybe
Cyclops.
Not so much Famke Janssen, since she had died in The Last Stand, and she was like this taunting ghost in the Wolverine. So when the movie's starting, she's long dead at that point.
No, sure. No, I know. But I'm just saying, like, I don't think...
when Halle Berry shows up and she's playing Storm, one of the most popular X-Men, it's going to elevate the spirits of any fan, because whether you're a fan of Storm or a fan of Halle Berry, it matters that she's on the screen again in that role.
Right. And when you see Charles Xavier, Patrick Stewart, and you see Ian McKellen, and Bryan Singer's back, and the effects look good, that does kind of give a boost to this movie after the letdown that First Class was for me. I was okay.
But not for everybody, it's worth noting. But definitely, it's a return to form after certainly X-Men Origins Wolverine, though.
For sure. Okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. So they're going to shoot Wolverine's brain back in time, like you said, to stop Mystique killing Trask. So because she was killing Trask to stop the Sentinel program, but instead by killing Trask, it basically hypes them up and it solidifies the fact that we need the Sentinel program.
Well, and not just that, but a core issue is the fact that she's captured after killing Trask, and they're able to use her mutant shapeshifting abilities to create the Sentinels that are capable of destroying the mutants through her shapeshifting powers. It takes them decades to get to the point where the Sentinels can do things like what she does, but once they do get there, they're like T-1000s. You just can't stop the motherfuckers, even with mutant powers.
Yeah, because as soon as you use your mutant power once against them, then they learn the power, and now they're, whatever. So
in terms of continuity, they become Nimrod. They're not just the simple giant robots anymore. They're like the super Sentinel Nimrod.
Is that what? Yeah, that's right. Nimrod was his name. I was like, while we were watching the movie, I was like, I know there's like a Sentinel that does this, but it wasn't Master Mold or whatever. So Nimrod, that's what it was. Thank you for filling in that gap. So the key is they can't send Professor X back to convince Mystique, because obviously that would be the easiest thing to do, because he's too old, folks. So
it's not just that. They specifically say the rationale is that the psychological tumult that occurs from going backwards in time in that fashion would rip your brain apart. And so since Wolverine has the healing factor, that's what allows him to go back in time. Now, you tend to think of a healing factor as being more of a physiological rather than a psychological thing, and that Wolverine is not a person who's had the healthiest psychology, but they want you to just go with it.
Yeah, it's just like, okay, yeah, fine. Right? Like, his brain would have healed from all the other mindfuck shit he's been through if that was the case, but whatever. Let's
the adamantium bullet.
Yeah, right. Ooh. Okay, so they send it back to Beast's makeup still looks terrible, by the way, but at least he's not like CGI. They went to the practical makeup, but I thought that he still looked bad.
I can't recall enough. I think Beast looked better, certainly, and Mystique definitely looked better, and I think this is a situation. Well, actually, honestly, everything about the movie looks so much better than First Class. You can see that Bryan Singer had an eye for what would work well on the screen, and again, it's part of that leveling up. Beast may not have gone as far as he would have liked with some of the with the other characters, but I think compared to the previous incarnation, it's a huge improvement.
Except I still think Kelsey Grammer looked better.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Years and years and years earlier, but I did think his transforming looked good. So whenever he would revert back into non-blue Beast, I thought that they did a good job with that. Suddenly Xavier is walking. Oh, and then Xavier had told Logan when he goes back in time, I don't have my powers. And you're sort of like, what do you mean you don't have your powers? And that's confusing because I understand they say it and it's kind of supposed to be confusing, but the problem is that they don't remember that these are all period pieces. So when he says I'm going back to, 73 and I don't have my powers yet, the first thing I was thinking of was, okay, well then what year was First Class? I thought First Class was in the 60s because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So instead of like paying attention to the movie, I'm trying to figure out why he wouldn't have his powers. Instead of just like, you know what I mean? It's sort of like a meaning. They're foreshadowing something something that instead of me being like, ooh, I wonder why he doesn't have his powers, instead I'm trying to think of, okay, what were the years again? Because, you know, or did they fuck up? Did they
You shouldn't be doing math. You should be enjoying the story.
Exactly. And that's immediately I started doing math. Like, oh, okay. And then we find out it's got nothing to do with a time fuck up. It's that to cure his paralysis, he's taking the demutinizing shot that Beast developed in the first movie to
which he's also using because they want to have as much screen time with handsome Nicholas Hoult as possible, especially with Bryan Singer directing.
You're just going to keep taking jabs, aren't we? So yeah, he's basically injecting Xavier with this stuff and like a junkie to keep his legs working, but he has in turn lost all of his psychic abilities, and that's why he doesn't have powers. So he can walk, and he's got hair, but he's not psychic. Are we with me here, folks?
It's extremely stupid. And again, really why does every one of these movies have to have some sort of a mutant machine thing where it's like you're asking for such a huge buy of the audience every fucking time? And the whole thing is because, A, if he's got his mental abilities, then a lot of this movie just grinds to a halt because he could just fix it with his mental powers. And second, because they've got the actor, they want to be able to have adventures with the actor, so they want him to run around. But the physiology makes no fucking sense. And it doesn't help that somehow his taking the drug also turns him into like a heroin addict or something, because he acts like a total junkie. Beast is fine. He's a total junkie and an asshole and abusive and everything else. And then, of course, they're also trying to explain away, well, why aren't there X-Men in the 1970s? Oh, well, they all got drafted in the second term. It's like, you do remember that most people who got out of Vietnam were because they went to school, and you run out of school. So how is it that people from your school are getting drafted into the military? Also, aren't you training teenagers? Because you know who else doesn't get drafted? Teenagers. What the fuck are they doing with this shit? Do they not know how anything in real life works in this fucking movie?
I mean, it's just
shit.
The junkie thing.
Guess what?
So he's like
there
an
are mutant
alcoholic.
women. You know who doesn't get drafted in the Vietnam War? Women. What the fuck? None of this makes sense.
Brutal, dude. It was brutal. So it goes from the future scene, which I thought, and that fight scene where they're fighting the Sentinels, this was all really, really good. And now we're back here with the first class cast, and it's shit all over again,
and I have
dude.
to say, too, that whole group in the future, besides the fact that even though I've never been a huge Iceman fan, it's still kind of cool seeing Sean Ashmore back as Bobby with the beard and everything else. Like, again, it's that part of that homecoming thing with Halle Berry, too. But I also love how Singer just cast another group of Mystiques, because almost none of those actors talk, but the guy that got to play Bishop absolutely comes off the comic book page to be Bishop. Yeah. Omar Sy. Bing Bing Fan as Blink is right out of the comics. She looks fantastic, and the fact that she's got that pancake makeup with the pink hair, that should totally look like shit. She looks fantastic. Warpath is awesome. You know, they don't talk, and probably they would have sucked if they'd opened their mouths for any length of time, but in action, in costume, shot the way they were shot, looked awesome.
Dude, I felt the exact same way. And I hate to say it, because we have a pending Marvel movie that I think is abandoning this formula. When they stick to the comics, it's eerie how well it kind of works out. Just stick to the comics. Mm-hmm. When you do your own thing is when it turns into some cornball, cheesy junk that nobody ends up liking. And I thought this opening scene was a lot more comic book than it was cinematic universe storytelling. And it worked like extremely well. It worked extremely well. Anyway.
But then they have to go back to explaining what's happening in the 1970s that we don't have X-Men yet. And then, that's when they start getting up their own ass again.
Yeah, so Wolverine starts sort of explaining what happens to Xavier and Beast. They decide we got to wrangle up a pot. We got to get Magneto out, right? If I'm missing any detail here, please tell me. My notes are not that clear.
So the thing of it is, they've got Wolverine, and he's got the mentality of the future Wolverine, so he can kick ass and stuff. He's got the bone claws again, but they look better because they're being shot by a qualified director with better effects and such. So you've got Wolverine is really the only fully effective member, because Beast is having to play nursemaid to Xavier. Xavier is just fucking useless, and they shouldn't even be bothering with his ass. Although I guess it's part of his redemption arc that he's going to go through all this stuff. Magneto has been in prison for a decade, and we find out the reason for it is he supposedly assassinated President Kennedy. And I know it's been a long time, but I really felt grossed out by that reference. I really just feel like it's disrespectful to to drag John F. Kennedy into the fucking X-Men franchise. And so apparently Magneto has been in this bunker for the past decade where he's under cement in a tomb, basically surrounded by all these plastics, which I'm not sure in the early 70s they were still in a place where they could do half the shit they're supposed to be doing to keep this guy locked up. But again, it's comic book movies. They've altered the timeline to some degree by having the existence of mutants in the first place. We can kind of go with it, except for the fact that they left him to rot for a decade. Nobody went to save this guy who's like the mutant messiah to some degree, and he never figures out a way to save himself. So it makes them all look bad by having him there. But it's also just entirely too convenient that these movies are set about a decade apart, and so he just locked up Magneto for a decade, and that explains why he hasn't done anything in 10 years, just like Xavier hasn't done anything in 10 years because he wants to walk instead of having telepathy, you know? It's all this no-prize shit for continuity that they create in the movies instead of actually telling the stories from the comic books.
Yeah, and again, I cannot say it enough. They made this like, you are the one making the decision to have to no-prize your own shit. Like, you did it. You're the one that shot Xavier at the end of the last movie, and now you got to explain why he can walk. Like, you're the one that did this. No, maybe not directly, like Bryan Singer didn't, do that. But
yeah, here's an idea. Have, Banshee and Angel and all these other fucking people, have them do their thing for 20 years, and then bring in the X-Men that people care about. And these are like these older guys that maybe didn't amount to a lot, but they were the best that we had back in those days. And you just pick up from the X-Men that people care about. You don't have to have another filler movie where you're explaining why we don't have X-Men 20 years later.
I'm telling you, it boggles my mind. They so bought into, let's just make, and they obviously thought about it, we're going to make like 4 period piece movies. One's in the 60s, one's in the 70s, one's in the 80s, one's in the 90s, or whatever, with zero connective tissue between the two of them. We're not going to explain, and obviously I know you're going to talk about this too. The actors aren't going to age for 40 years. Like, these are not small details.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, look, we got to at some point put 80s music. Right. So that's it. Well, how are we going to explain this? Just make some dumb shit up. Make it up. We don't care because we got to have some 80s music. And you're just like, that's it? Mm-hmm. That's what you're doing. That's what you're basing the whole cinematic universe. What about let's fucking paralyze Xavier and then suddenly he can't walk? We didn't think about it. It doesn't matter because we have to have period music and maybe show a couple cars from that. It's like, that's it? That's the cornerstone. That's the part you thought out. You didn't think any of the rest of it out. Just head scratch.
And again, I could argue that it was ableist bullshit that they couldn't just have Xavier be in a wheelchair for this adventure. But it's not that. It's that they're doing everything they can to protract the story, to elongate the story, to no prize it. Of course, he's got to not have powers because otherwise, why didn't he do this, that, and the other thing? So they negate those possibilities through asinine means, As far as the aging thing, one of the things I try to do is watch a lot of the criticisms online. I didn't read other people's reviews, which I've done in the past, or you've done in the past as well. What I did is I went on to like YouTube and watched some of the parody things and pitch meetings and stuff like that. And a lot of people do get hung up on the age thing, and I understand that being a deal breaker for a lot of people. I'm willing to accept it because it's a choice. And one guy in particular, I think is Captain Midnight, who had pointed out that he likes that it's almost like more like the comic books to not have him age, since clearly if you read old X-Men stories, they're set in the 60s and in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s. So in that regard, it's sort of part of the comic book contrivance, and he actually supported that. But I like that it is a choice, and I really don't want to see all these actors running around in old age makeup. So it's not that I necessarily agree with the choice, because I don't think we need this movie to exist in this particular time frame, in these particular circumstances. They could have just jumped the timeline up another 20 years and maybe recast some of these parts again. But because they had bankable actors that were, ready to go, they had them under contract, probably under cheap terms, they're going to keep using those actors. And I do, generally speaking, like the actors, with some exceptions and some asterisks, then okay, I'm willing to accept that choice. But they have to know, and I know, that a large percentage of the audience is not going to be on board with that particular choice. And it's a bold and flawed choice to make.
Well, and so normally it would not really bother me, and I'm totally with you. I don't want them putting old people makeup on them and stuff like that. Like, I can suspend disbelief for some of it, except that really a lot of this starts from we have to have Magneto become Magneto in Auschwitz. Except throughout these movies, they keep coming up with other fucking scenarios to give him motivations, and they forget about the old ones. Like life-changing, like in Age of Apocalypse. They give him these crazy, like that's what sets him off and turns him into the Magneto we know. What? Well, then why did we go through all the stupid Auschwitz shits again if this is the reason? You know what I mean? Like, then you could have just made these movies start in the fucking 80s. And then we don't have to think about why all the dude has done is just lost some hair over 40 years. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they did it themselves, and that's what drives me insane.
Right. Well, it's why do you have to force form a team? I know it's called First Class, but it doesn't have to be First Class. Why do they have to form a team in 1963? Why isn't this a Magneto and Professor X team-up movie like they were in the comic books and nobody else? And don't bring anything else into it besides those two having their early meetings, starting their friendship, supporting each other, and not dragging all this other stuff into it. But they chose to do that. Why are they introducing Cerebro in 1963? And so we have to deal with Cerebro for 20, 30 years before the X-Men movies. Why don't you work up to Cerebro? But because they shoot that load early on, they poisons the franchise by having too much too soon instead of being able to build up to it.
I agree 1,000%. And like you said, a lot of these characters are just bullshit because they're just working to eventually get to the cast we all like. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, and why do we have to see? I know that
you didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Just start.
Magneto does not have to be able to stop dozens of nuclear missiles in midair in the first movie. Maybe he just can do the coin trick and some light stuff, and he just develops over time because since it's a mutant power and not like an athletic ability, at age 24 he doesn't have to be at the peak of his power. You can just have him get more and more powerful. Same with Xavier. They don't have to be at their peak at an early age. Maybe they actually work at it and get better and better over the years instead of coming up with I was having a juice with anti-mutant serum for a decade. Think this shit through.
Yeah.
Because you're saying they intended to do this. I disagree. I don't think they thought more than one movie at a time, and that's why they keep having to come up with these dumbass roadblocks for movie after movie. Because I kind of think that maybe the intention with this movie was we're going to do this prequel that's going to bridge the two movies and fix the things that were broken in the other movies, and then we can go back to the X-Men again. And then I think they changed their mind, or they had those contracts with these bankable stars that are only becoming more bankable when a movie like Days of Future Past makes a lot of money. And so I think to some degree maybe the suits are the reasons why these movies keep getting fucked up. But I also think there's some just really questionable creative choices being made and not nearly enough foresight.
Maybe, except I'm sure, I guess I'd have to find some contracts for these people to see hey, did they sign Michael Fassbender for a 4-movie deal? Because if that's the case, then you should have planned the shit out, right? Give me a break here, dude. Or was he a 1-movie deal for First Class, and then when it made money, then they signed him to
another 3?
I guess that could be.
I can guarantee you they locked Jennifer Lawrence in because there's no fucking way she'd have signed that contract even as of Days of Future Past. It had to have happened on that very first movie.
She has regrets. Okay? Yeah, she got swindled on that one, and that's the nature of the beast sometimes. But honestly, look, I'm not a huge X-Men fan, obviously, but I'm telling you, there's just something that rubs me the wrong way. The first class of X-Men were Banshee and the bee-winged or fly-winged Angel, and it's like that Havoc. These are the first X-Men, and the Johnny-come-latelys are Cyclops and Jean Grey, and
and also it's worth noting too. Havoc. Who is Havoc? Havoc is Scott Summers' brother. Why is Scott Summers' brother born 20 years before? Why would you go 20 years between kids? Why isn't it his dad? Or why does it have to have anything to do with Scott Summers? Because again, these people do not have to be called the X-Men. They are. They don't have to be. These could be people that are just maybe they don't ever gel as a team. Maybe they don't. They're all conflicted, or maybe they're just not that good. Maybe they all die on the first mission. There's all these ways of making it to where these guys don't have to diminish the X-Men that people actually know and love. But again, they just don't think that far in advance.
Well, and again, unfortunately for Jennifer Lawrence, it didn't get brought up again. It's the decision to make her with Xavier and Magneto, the 3 pillars of the X universe, is still just one of the most mind-blowing. I just don't understand who thought this was a good idea. I just don't understand. Mystique is such. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I haven't read a lot of X-Men comic books. She's not queen shit of the X universe, right?
So this is probably a good time to drill down on Mystique. So Mystique is invented for Days of Future Past. We're at a point where you remember the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. You've got Magneto, Toad, Blob, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and those people are either no longer notable characters in the Marvel universe, or they've become heroes, or they're in flux. Magneto was in a weird period of time. So they introduce a new Brotherhood of Evil Mutants who are led by this new character named Mystique, who, admittedly she was around. She was actually a Miss Marvel villain to begin with, and then Claremont brings her back for X-Men, and the whole storyline where they're mutant terrorists. They've basically picked up the baton left by Magneto when his old Brotherhood fell apart, and they're going to take it to the next level by going after these legislators that are attacking mutants through their bills and shit. So that makes great sense. Now, over the years, they didn't retcon a bunch of stuff, but they build out her history to make it that because she's a shapeshifter, she's much older than she appears to be. One thing that's interesting about the character, she is one of Marvel's first bisexual character, is arguably a lesbian character, because her having relations with men was something that kind of came in later on. When she was first introduced, she was in a lesbian relationship with her cohort Destiny, who was a person who could see the future, and I think that was actually one of the reasons why they were going after Senator Kelly, is they knew that he was going to be pivotal in the future of mutants, and Destiny placed the wrong bet on what they needed to do about that, and was actually going to create the Holocaust scenario that they were trying to thwart. Well, Destiny was a very old person, and so it made sense that Mystique was with this old woman because she herself was an old person. But again, one of the things that's interesting about Mystique is she's a character who is gender fluid. She can be male or female. And so at one point in time, the theory was that Nightcrawler wasn't she didn't give birth to Nightcrawler. She conceived Nightcrawler with Destiny, and she was the father of Nightcrawler rather than the mother. And I think that was actually one of Chris Claremont's plans at one point in time, and Marvel wouldn't sign off on it. So this is a character that definitely served a purpose in the Marvel Universe that was very distinct and pioneering. And they tie her into Sabretooth eventually, and eventually they made it where she had a child with Sabretooth, and he basically became his own little mini version of Senator Kelly, and they had to deal with that bullshit. And she's a spy, and they do a lot of shit where she's sort of like, almost like an Amanda Waller type person, where she's working with the government to forward the mutant agenda, but she's amoral, and she goes on these missions for the government and shit. She's got a lot going on. So Mystique is not a minor character. She is important for representation, and she's important within the X-Men sphere. And it would make sense for her to be a somewhat inspirational figure taken from the comic books, although at the same time, she's not the most high profile person. She tends to do a lot of like black ops type situations. So you wouldn't necessarily have the general public be aware of the stuff that she's doing. But one thing I think is really important in terms of the comic book continuity is that while she takes up a role similar to Magneto, and especially throughout the 80s when Magneto was actually a hero and took over Xavier's role as headmaster of the School for Gifted Youngsters, and so Magneto was off the board in terms of villainous activity for a while there. Mystique was doing what Magneto wasn't doing anymore without having any connection to Magneto himself. She was doing her own thing that was just similar to the type of stuff Magneto was doing. He was working for the same goals, but she wasn't working with Magneto. And so when they made her a lackey to Magneto in the original trilogy, they very much altered her role. So to some degree, it's a course correction to make her a much more pivotal figure in the second trilogy, the first trilogy, even though it doesn't align with the timeline very well. The issue, though, is that she is a lesbian and or trans character that is stripped of that in her adaptation of the movies. She's very clearly heteronormative throughout the entire X-Men franchise of films. But also, she takes a role, again, as this inspirational figure and this leader of the X-Men over the course of these movies. That's Storm's role. So this is a woman who's presenting as a Aryan woman, blonde, I don't know if she's blue-eyed, but she's very white. And she's taking a role that has historically been for a black woman, an African woman. So in elevating one female in the second trilogy or tetralogy of movies, what should be an instance of equality and representation is actually a huge signifier of the absence of that. So yeah, that's the issue with taking that Mystique in that direction. But it makes sense because of her prolonged lifespan to have her in First Class and to have her be a more pivotal figure there. And of course, Days of Future Past is her story. She is the central character. She's the threat that has to be stopped in the original comic books. Where they go with it from this movie is where you start running into problems.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess we can, when we get to Age of Apocalypse, or when we get to, sorry, I keep saying Age of Apocalypse, I apologize. We do Apocalypse, we can talk, or I guess more the end of this movie is where it starts to just like what? Like, okay, that's what we're doing now, I guess. Okay, so excellent stuff there, Mystique. Look at you there, Diablo Frank.
Look, their mutants come to me now, but you have to remember, I'm the spurned ex-wife. I spent like the 80s. I spent formative years of my comic book reading on X-Men. So I know that period pretty fucking well. I read those stories. I may not have ever read Dark Phoenix Saga in its entirety, but Days of Future Past is 2 issues, man. I had that covered. In fact, my brother owned the original issues because again, it was the 80s. So he bought them for probably the outrageous sum of like 10 or 15 bucks. And so I got to read the original copies of that one.
Look at you. I'm so proud. Whenever we bring comic books back into this stuff, it makes me happy. Okay, so let's get back to the movie. So they're trying to... Okay, I will say that when Wolverine wakes up in his young body, I dug that scene where he's sort of like, what the fuck? Like, what's going on? And those dudes break in, and he's sleeping with that guy's chick, whatever.
And yeah, that's the sort of stuff that Logan should be getting up to. But you also have that moment of the female gaze. And as a straight dude, I'm still like, damn, that dude's in great shape, man. It's an aspirational vision for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you could go back in time, maybe. Yeah, I mean, dude's just extremely jacked. Dude is taking every horse hormone on the face of the planet for these movies. Veins that don't
It's normative determinism on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can totally see why he was like, I gotta stop making these movies, dude. He needs to stop making these movies for his own health because he just gets outrageously jacked.
Well, and the truth is, as game as he is to play Wolverine, the dude, like, he's a song man. He wants to do musicals and shit. You know, this is kind of a distraction from the course of his life, his intended course.
Yeah, that's another. It might be another contract deal where he's just signed up for them shits, as they say. Okay, so he's talked to Xavier and Beast. Xavier's a junkie. He's wasted. He's an asshole. He's injecting the stuff into his body. It's very strange looking on the screen. They're like, we don't get Magneto. So how did they find Quicksilver?
Logan knew him because he's from the future.
Ah, that's right. Logan knows. That's right. They go to Quicksilver's house.
And again, it's a 70s set movie, but it's very 80s to get a guy who probably is in his 30s to play a teenager.
Yeah, and then when they talk about like Pietro and Professor X are supposed to be 10 years apart in age, and I'm just like, what? Like, but he's a kid, but he's not a kid. The actor's not a kid, but he's playing a kid. But Xavier was just in a movie back in the 60s, and it just none of this. Like, you have to just throw it all out and just
let's keep in mind too, this is Pietro, right? And yet he's a white kid from the suburbs again.
Well, they call him Peter, I think. I don't think they ever call him Pietro. So they basically, they say Quicksilver is the dude to spring Magneto out. They sort of foreshadow that Peter knows that. Or no, does he make some joke about his dad was a magnet guy or something like that? And that's kind of what. Anyway,
something like that. I don't know if they. I think they may wait until the next movie to let us know that he knows that his mom hooked up with Magneto and that he's Magneto's kid.
I think they hint at it once in this movie, and then it's more of a thread of the movie.
Well, and see, it's really obvious too because they both have white hair. Wait,
yeah, duh. It's all about colors in these movies.
That's the joke. Is he for some reason, even though this guy at this point is going to be well into his 30s in continuity, he does not have white hair. Still.
And you were talking about Magneto, right?
Magneto, yeah.
Yes. But no,
they could have both been maturely white-haired, but that didn't happen because I guess Fassbender wasn't willing to do a job.
It's all about colors, dude. It's Mystique and Beast. Why? We blue. We both blue. We're bonding over blueness. It's come on, it's right there. They should both have gray hair. So I think it's pretty unanimous that all of the Quicksilver scenes in all these movies are fantastic. Like, they nail the super speedster stuff. When he duct tapes the dude in the elevator, fantastic. All that stuff. I dug all the Quicksilver springing Magneto from
the time in a
prison.
Bottle sequence is probably the best scene of ever in any X-Men movie that's been made. That it's so fun. Everybody loves it. It's a perfect marriage of song and activity. It's such a huge highlight of the entire franchise. I don't know anybody who doesn't love that sequence.
Yeah, well, and I thought his sequence here, as they're escaping, where they're firing all the bullets at him or whatever, and he's running around, as the sort of prequel to that scene in the next movie is just great. It's just like, it's great. They screw up so much in these movies, but I'm like, this is like spot on. This is the gold standard for super speedster running.
And the effects too. There's at no point are you ever thinking that he's not moving so fast that it's as though time has stood still. You totally buy in.
It's great. Totally. And I'm like, and look, I've seen the Quicksilver scenes like on YouTube because you hear them talk about it. You hear the Zeitgeist talk about how that's the best parts of these movies. So I've watched the scenes on YouTube, and they're just great. It's just great. They do a fantastic job. Totally tip my cap. Whoever was, and you can tell that they put so much effort into it too. Like, so much so it almost feels like in some ways the movie's just sort of based around that scene in both of these movies. But that's fine. But at least it's good. At least this is fantastic. So yeah, the scene in the kitchen I thought was just awesome. Let me see. So then we find out that Magneto did not kill JFK. JFK, folks, was a mutant. Magneto was trying to save him from assassination, and it just didn't go down. And then he got framed for the murder. Does that make it better for you, Diablo Frank?
Kind of worse, really. I don't know. It's really hard because it's like, it's bad that Magneto killed the president of the United States. Yes. Is it bad that they're inferring the president of the United States had mutant powers from a fucking comic book? Yes. So I really think whichever side, it's definitely both options are in super bad taste. So the question is, which do you find more distasteful, and why do they feel the need to go there in the first place? Oh, because none of these people studied any history, and the only thing they know about the 1960s was Vietnam War, Cuban Missile Crisis, assassination of JFK. I guess they could have worked fucking Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy in there as well. So I think that would have actually been even worse. So, okay.
or this was Neil Armstrong was actually a mutant or some shit like that. Like, let's just hit all the historical high points.
King
like,
had super orator powers, and that's why the FBI had to go after him.
Or Hank McCoy built the Apollo program or some stupid junk like that. Like, it's just dude, not good. I'm with you. It made it worse for me. I'm like, what? But get it, magic bullet. He controls metal. The guy actually was the president. Got his brain blown out. Like, it's just not cool.
Yeah. Well, and also, it gets back to the whole Magneto thing. Is he the worst villain of all time, or is he the savior of mutant kind? We're gonna have it both ways simultaneously, always.
Yeah, it'd be like if in a Transformer movie they made the car he was riding in was like a Decepticon, and that's what what I mean. It's like, no, we don't need to go there. The guy was actually
must save Jackie.
Yeah, the guy was actually a human being who was the president of the country who got his brain. Like, it's just not
show a little class. I mean, we're making fun on a podcast. We didn't make a movie about this shit, okay?
Yeah, and it's meant to be like serious. Like, they're not joking about it. They're like, seriously, John F. Kennedy was a mutant, and I was trying to save him. And I'm just, we should not even be having this conversation. I thought, and here's one thing they do right in these movies. They do little detail stuff with the powers that I appreciate. They do a good job of like really thinking about, like, it was something that bothered me with Doctor Strange, where really for a lot of the movie they're making energy swords, and I'm like, not energy swords, dude. And other than the sling ring, it's just like yellow sparkly stuff. I mean, the sling ring is yellow sparkly stuff, but all of his powers are mostly yellow. They're not really using their brain
after
for the powers.
Having watched the Doctor Strange direct-to-DVD cartoon where they essentially were redoing the Matrix, I was relieved that it wasn't that, but it wasn't Doctor Strange for me either. It was very much like not as bad as that, but within the sphere still.
Yeah, but so I love it when they do stuff like, Magneto got hit in the back of the head and he's stitching himself up using his powers, like little stuff like that. That stuff that you can't half-ass that stuff. And so I love it when they do stuff like that. The Quicksilver stuff is them looking really, really detailed at the dude's powers and being like, what could he do in this situation? Let's get a whole team in here to come up with ideas. Little stuff like Magneto being able to stitch his own cuts from like the back of his head using his powers and like a mirror. I think that kind of stuff is really cool. I don't know. So I made a note about that like that.
I think we have to point out too, since we were talking about around the same time as when Mystique breaks into, I guess, Trask Industries or whatever his company is called, to try to find out what he's up to in the development of the Sentinels and other. I don't think he's actually got the Sentinels yet. I think that he's still doing the mutant tracker thing, where somehow they're able to detect mutant energies or something, which again, like silly comic booky stuff, right? It actually goes do 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 do. It's like a metal detector for mutant powers. Like, okay, sure, whatever. But she's going in to check in on that, and in pursuit of that, she gets into his files, and we determine that most of the cast of the previous movie were captured and dissected by Trask, which of course is murder. And so you'd think, well, okay, let me take these files and maybe send this to a news agency, and maybe that would at least cause some controversy or something. But no, instead she tears up a little bit while pretending to be Trask, and then it just girds her for going after the guy. They discard all of those actors, and I've already said they were pretty much disposable anyway, but to literally dispose of them, it feels very cruel on Singer's part, to just like, I'm not going to do anything with these people, we're just going to get rid of them. And that the problem that I talked about, well, you create this team, you can't just create this team and not have it affect the world. Well, you can't, you just kill them all off screen. So, but it does raise stakes, and it does give Mystique motivation, and makes you sympathetic to her. And a problem I have with a lot of these movies is that ultimately I have much greater sympathy for Mystique than I end up having for either Xavier or Magneto. I understand her motivations. I believe in her cause. She doesn't take things to the same extremes that the other guys do. Even in the pursuit of killing Trask, I understand where she's coming from, and I can't say that I'd do something differently if I were in her shoes. She's like the relatable one of the three.
Yeah, exactly. I think she has more motivations than they do. That makes sense. I totally agree. And like I said, I didn't say, but like I was going to say, I feel like that scene, I thought that was good because it does explain where that team has gone in the last decade, and it was pretty gruesome, and I didn't like any of those characters anyway, so it's kind of fine. But like the way you point out, like if she just would have stolen the file and just given it to the news, that probably would have just destroyed this whole thing. I mean, I guess maybe in the 70s there were enough people that would have been like, get those mutants out of here, that's fine, or whatever. But I don't know, dude. You feel like there would be enough World War II memories to not want to see people were like human beings or Homo superiors or whatever, were dissected.
I don't think the general public was very aware of the Holocaust until going into the 70s. A lot of that was kept quiet for a long time. And I don't recall there being a lot of discussion about it. And then in the 70s, you see a lot more stuff like Boys from Brazil. And, you start to see actual Holocaust movies being made as opposed to World War II movies being made. So I'm not sure that that might have been the point where they were actually starting to talk about that stuff. But you also have the bit where Mystique goes to Vietnam and has to free a group of mutants from being dragged into Trask Industries by Stryker, who's still being played by the same actor. And you can definitely once again see that a lot of the prototype for the Marvel movies are the X-Men movies. The fact they're still continuing to use the same actor from, I think, what was it? Okay, this is the third actor who's played Stryker, but the same guy's played young Stryker across numerous movies and continues to show up. And we also get the nod to Havoc, one of the only ones that survives. But again, I didn't even know that was Havoc when I watched the movie the first time. It wasn't until later on that I realized that there was a continuity there. And, hey, here's Havoc for a scene, and then we're never going to discuss this guy again, and he's not going to help with the mission at all. But continuity, I guess. It's weird that all these movies have this weird relationship where they do these nods to continuity while simultaneously ignoring either the repercussions or the actual developments, as they should result from that continuity.
Yeah, and Havoc was so forgettable in the first movie that I think when he popped up it might have been this scene, my wife was like, he was in the last one? I'm like, yeah, like in the whole movie. Like he was one of the OG first class guys, the guy who they couldn't control his powers.
No impression whatsoever, and the only reason why is because he's got such a goofy manifestation of his power, shooting it out of his sternum, because they took literally his costume,
Yeah. So it's just, no good. But you're right. It does kind of keep solidifying her motivations because she ends up being the whole backbone of all these movies, folks. Weirdly. So what happens here? Professor X, like, I don't know, are we skipping any meaningful scenes? Professor X, like, backfeeds through Logan's mind to go into the future to have a conversation with himself?
Okay, so here's my recollection. You have the extraordinary time in a bottle scene. Then, because he's a quote-unquote teenager, they drop off the best member of the team and the most powerful member of the team at that particular point in time, Quicksilver, and then they carry on to confront Mystique before she can assassinate Trask. Logan, I think, in the midst of this, gets hit with a stun gun, and or something gets triggered. I think, no, he sees Stryker in the room, I think, amongst the people working with Trask, since they've already established in the Mystique scene we just discussed that they're working together. And so he starts to have all these flashbacks, and so he's lost in time and space for a little bit, and, shaking and stuff. Mystique gets hit with the stun gun, I think, and then Magneto has the new heel turn where he's decided that Mystique is too great of a risk, so he's going to kill her, but he can't kill her later on. He's got to try to kill her right there in the room, right that minute, instead of being her buddy, carrying her off somewhere safe. He's got to make sure that she leaves like a genetic fucking sample, so they still get what they need to make the Sentinel program. Basically, we went from the best scene in the movie to where the movie fucking loses me. It goes from the best X-Men movie, it's on track to be the best X-Men movie ever, and then it's like, oh great, we're roughly an hour in, and now we've got this stupid fucking plot complication based on a bunch of people doing a bunch of dumb shit, and now we're gonna have to deal with the consequence of the dumb shit for the rest of the movie, and you've like kicked me off of the movie that I was thoroughly enjoying with this bullshit,
Yeah, it was like, oh, they got her blood. Way to go, Eric. Like, come on, dude. It's like, oh, jeez, dude, come on. Okay, man, I have like a huge gap in my notes. I don't know if that's good for
you
the
movie. You probably got bumped out of the movie the same way I was, because the whole rest of the movie is everybody's kind of running around all over the place, and they fucked up. They know they fucked up, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to fix it, and it slowly works their way up to the big finale at where Magneto lifts up an entire fucking stadium to encircle the area where Nixon and Trask are going to be, and is he helping to assassinate Trask and the President of the United States for real, going after the president, or is Mystique going to kill them, or is Mystique not going to kill them? It's this crisis of conscience, and it's like, by the end of the movie, I don't fucking care, because you went from this great first hour, and then there's another hour and 10 minutes of them just being fucking dickheads. Oh, and I guess we have to see Professor X decide that he's going to stop taking the juice and get his mental powers back and use Cerebro, and they still don't employ Quicksilver again, even though that's an obvious resource they could be getting towards. But it's all about convincing Mystique not to kill Trask, and therefore it changes the timeline.
Well, okay, so there are a few things there too that also, like, more stuff in there that doesn't make sense. The train cars have had the Sentinels on it, and Magneto goes there, and he just like puts metal in one of them, and you're like,
oh right, he like takes control of the Sentinel because it has metal. So is it like a meat puppet essentially, where it's not actually functioning, and he's just moving the metal around? Yeah.
But what I thought he was doing at first was because he's taking like the railroad metal. Like this is not some like special. He's just literally pulling metal off the railroad behind it, and then it's like feeding into the Sentinels. And I'm like, my thought was, he's doing this so in like the future, he can save himself from dying, right? Like he knows that after talking to Logan and Professor X that he eventually gets murked by all these Sentinels, right? So
I'm trying to figure if you're overthinking or underthinking this whole thing, given there's like 50 fucking years in the future at that point.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I was like, why is he putting metal in it? Why doesn't he just destroy it then? I'm like, he's sabotaging the Sentinels for the future. It's like a contingency, just in case he actually fucked this up and they actually have Raven's DNA now, and they can do all this stuff. Even though I think they say later on, well, we got to have more than just blood. Okay, that's how he's going to do it. So I thought that at some point the future Eric was going to use the metal that his past self had put in it, and instead it's like he can just control the Sentinels, and it's like, what? Like these are robots with like computer programming, and it's like, no, he can like take over. He's not like puppeteering it by using the metal in it. Like he's actually, instead of having it target mutants, he's making it target humans. And you're like, but like putting metal in it doesn't change. Like it didn't solder the circuit board differently. Like it just made no sense to me. I was like, I don't understand what the hell is going on here. And then he makes he tells one of them, go do what you were supposed to do. So then it starts targeting Professor X, and then or it's targeting Beast. So Beast injects himself with his non-mutant syringe so that he's not a mutant anymore.
Right, so they can't detect him, so he can get through the metal detectors and stuff. But Wolverine still is, so I don't even know why. What? Huh?
It doesn't matter. But it's like, then shouldn't? But you're a mutant. So if Magneto's telling the machine to change its programming back to hate all mutants, why isn't it attacking Magneto? And then it ends up doing it later. But it's like, why didn't it do it to begin with? It just is so stupid. The end of this movie,
entire second half of the movie just shouldn't have been happening. You know, and I'm very frustrated watching it because I was enjoying the first half so much, and they were doing so many things right, and then it just becomes a muddle in the second half.
No, but I did like.
And somewhere in the midst of that too, we see that the Sentinels break through the defenses, and they do manage to kill everybody, and specifically Magneto, as you referenced. So there's some escalation of stakes that way, but it's also happening in the future they're fighting against. So nobody thinks they're going to actually leave it in that place. So yada yada yada, yada.
It was gruesome though. Like all the deaths are like really gruesome. Like they like two of the Sentinels pull Colossus in half, and one of them burns Warpath's face off using Sunspot's power. I mean, it was like they were.
And again, that's an element of what made the comics work, and I'm glad they made sure to get that into the movie too, even though it's completely different characters and a lot of the circumstances are different, but it has the right tone and the right, activities going on.
Oh, and I thought Magneto putting the rebar in Logan's body was really cool, but gruesome. Like it's like the Marvel movies don't go this far, dude. Like they Thanos kind of breaks Loki's neck, right? Like that's just, like, it doesn't really go that far. Putting rebar, threading it through Wolverine's body, and then casting him into the ocean,
and he never comes back from it. He's out of the movie essentially at that point.
And it's just like, my wife's like, isn't he dead? Like, isn't he dead now? I'm like, no, he doesn't ever really die. You can't really kill Wolverine. You can't drown him. He just is drowned until he's back around.
He's a Highlander.
And then, yeah, exactly. But I thought that was cool.
By the way, that wasn't always true. That's something that developed over time. One of the things that they had back in the 80s was that he was, he did have concerns about drowning or suffocating because he could die that way. But I think since then that's all been lost because he's just so powerful now.
Yeah. I liked everything that took place in that future because they flash forward, and I thought all those deaths were pretty intense. So let me see what. I guess so. Yeah, right. They've now changed the future, right?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, what happens is Mystique finally walks away and doesn't kill Trask, and I guess they're able to destroy whatever sample they had of her DNA. And because she's, she goes on the run and she becomes this, resistance leader and stuff, and she's able to avoid detection and capture. So she strengthens the mutant cause, I suppose. And so the future that we were afraid of never occurs. And in fact, in one of the best, again, a great moment from any of the X-Men movies is Wolverine wakes up in I guess what would have been 2014 at that point. And Jean Grey's still alive. Cyclops still alive. All the original actors are still playing them. And Wolverine has also gotten his full memories back, I think, at that point. And he's working as an instructor at the school, and and Rogue's back, and she's got her powers too because the Last Stand never happens, and everybody's cool, everybody's happy. It's a great way to end the X-Men franchise or to have a new beginning from that point. Except you still wonder why the fuck Peter Dinklage was recast. Why they recast him as Trask. He's a great actor. I love him. There's no reason why his being a little person has to factor in any things, but he is so far from Bill Duke. You keep waiting for them to explain why they've got such a completely different actor to play the same character, and they just don't. And there's so much continuity that's clearly seeming to be important to the franchise, but they just don't bother with that. It's just so weird, but it also alludes to a problem the franchise is going to really run headlong into coming up soon, where it's another instance of a black erasure. You've got a black actor who just doesn't matter enough for them to even bother to bring him back for the sequel. And that's going to be an issue going forward. And it's already been an issue. So it's one of those situations that's been building up, and this movie doesn't help in that regard.
Oh, and then we should also mention, so they pull Wolverine out of the water, right? And it's Stryker's team that pulls him out. And then it turns out that it's not Stryker, it's Mystique. But shouldn't it have been Stryker?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, there's a lot of conversation about that. It's like you're overriding X-Men Origins Wolverine, and you're by not having him teamed up with Sabretooth and all this other kind of stuff. Although it doesn't necessarily make sense, why wouldn't he be with Sabretooth at that point? See, that's the problem, is they're trying to change continuity, but the continuity they're trying to change precedes the point at which this is happening. There were some jokes based, like, why would you have Wolverine go back to like 5 minutes before Mystique's going to kill Trask? Why don't you go back and have, stop Magneto from interfering with the Kennedy assassination or some shit like that? The X-Men Origins already established that this guy dates back to like the 1800s. At this point in time, Wolverine should be running around on missions with Sabretooth. And even if it's on a layover, Stryker gets him earlier, but he is not Stryker, and so why do you even reference him? It's very, very muddy, and again, not very well thought out. And it was just an instance for them to continue to hype up Mystique, since one of the biggest name actors, the biggest name actor in the cast is Jennifer Lawrence. So they just, hey, look, Mystique, she's so badass. I guess that was the rationale. Or they just wanted to have the whole woo ending, but Stryker's already a woo ending. What?
Yeah, I feel like when Stryker pulled him out of the water, I'm like, oh, that's it. That's how they get him in the Weapon X program. And he's got the metal in his body, so that probably gives them the idea because he didn't die. I was like, oh, this is great. And then he turns into Mystique. And I'm like, what? What the fuck?
And are we going to address this? Absolutely not.
And then I'm just scratching my head instead of being like, oh, okay, cool. They're setting up the Weapon X program. Instead, it's like, nope. So why? I don't know. Does it make her cooler? No. I don't get it. So, but then, the flash forward to, except didn't he wake up when what would have been? I mean, that doesn't make any sense either. The fact that he's waking up in like 2014, does that mean that Days of Future Past was taking place in 2014?
No. He's waking up. Yeah, the movie contrives to have him finally regain his memories in 2015, 2014, whatever it is. But I think I don't know, maybe. Now that I think about it, it's like, because I think they say that it's supposed to be the early 2020s in the movie, or sometime in the 2020s. So why would suddenly have him be? I mean, or maybe it's supposed to be the 2020s. I'm just assuming it's the modern day, but maybe it is supposed to be the 2020s. It's not like any of these actors or these characters age, so it doesn't really matter when it's taking place. Let's just go with it. Okay, it's 2020 something. So he does wake back up in the non-Days of Future Past future.
Right. Yeah. It's just, instead of it being dystopian, it's just like la la la, everything's fine.
Yeah. It's not like they're going to have any sequels to this particular movie and advance the X-Men narrative ever again.
Yeah. So I get it doesn't matter, and it was nice to see, Kelsey Grammer walks by them and you get to see Rogue. And then isn't there like a whole Rogue cut to this movie where there's more?
Yeah, I still haven't seen it. I own a copy of it on Blu-ray, but I've yet to actually sit down and watch it. From what Mr. Fix-It said, it doesn't add very much. It's like 5 extra minutes or some shit.
Oh, I was looking on the Wikipedia. They said it's something like 15 minutes.
Is it? Okay.
And it's like supposed to be significant, but
I'll watch it.
We didn't watch it.
I haven't yet.
Okay, cool. Insert whatever you watch in here real quick. Mm-hmm. So let me see. Yeah, I will say this movie was definitely better than First Class. I liked enough. You said you were checked out of first hour. I checked out maybe. I would think I made it a little further than you. And then even though the back half of the movie is so bad, it has all the stuff that doesn't make any sense. They do cut to the future part where they're killing each character brutally one by one as they're closing in on Shadowcat and Logan and Professor X. And I dug that part of it. I like the Magneto putting the rebar in Wolverine's body and stuff like that. So there were still some moments later on that I liked.
Yeah, and I don't want to disparage it overly much. I think even the second hour of Days of Future Past is better than anything in First Class. It's better than anything in most of these X-Men movies. It's just so much less good than the first hour of Days of Future Past. It so loses all of its momentum from that point that it sours me somewhat. But watching watching it on its own, I'm fine with that. There's enough good stuff in this movie that I could watch the whole thing from beginning to end and be happy. I don't have to stop the movie and be like, no, I don't care about the rest of that. If I sit down and watch this movie, I'll watch the entire movie. I'm not just going to watch the key scenes. So it's a very good X-Men movie. I don't know how great it would be against a lot of the Marvel movies, but I think it's a very good X-Men movie.
Yeah. So, and that's where I'm kind of with you too. Within this X universe, this is definitely up there, because they all have some of the problems we just mentioned in this movie. They've all got them, and way worse, where timelines don't make sense and characters are interacting. They shouldn't be interacting. But at least, like I said, the effects are good in this movie as opposed to bad. It's got some practical effects in this movie that are pretty good. You know what I mean? There's a little humor, like when Wolverine goes to walk through the metal detector and he's like freaking out and it doesn't go off, and he's like, oh yeah, because I don't have metal in my body. Like little stuff like that. I like that. It's got the Quicksilver scene. So this movie's got a lot going for it. But again, the ending, it's just like, because at this point you're trying to make a universe. Like, you're trying at this point they're trying to copy Marvel, and they're doing so bad with the connective tissue that it's so obvious. Like,
they're beholden to the continuity they've created, and they don't have to be, but they are committed to doing that, you know. And I think that it's an interesting thing, because one of the problems that the DCEU has had is they keep trying to catch up to where Marvel's at in a hurry and skipping steps, and that causes them problems. Where one of the benefits the X-Men movies have is that they have 8 years on Marvel, 8 years of world building, and they've got a universe of characters already that make sense interrelated to one another, and you don't have to try to figure out how a Doctor Strange works or Galactus works, because the X-Men and the whole mutant concept, it makes sense within this circle. So there's an advantage that they have, and I think they're trying to exploit that advantage to mixed results. But certainly if you look at the X-Men franchise versus the DCEU, I think X-Men is much stronger positioned, and overall has stronger execution from installment to installment.
Yeah, exactly. And like we were saying earlier, as soon as Storm shows up in this movie, you're like, yeah! You know what I mean? The fact that they can do stuff like that, like you said, they've got some building blocks there that gives them a head up on other, cinematic universes like DC. Because they've got these characters, as soon as you see Logan on the screen, even when they had him in First Class, where he comes in and he's like, whatever he says, like, shut the fuck up or get the fuck out of here, whatever. I'm sure in the theater in First Class, everybody went crazy and started clapping for it. You're able to do stuff like that because you've got these continuity of actors. And I think, like I said, for the most part, people like those actors. So, it's an easy well to tap. Let's just have Hugh Jackman show up again. Like, we've got this dude signed for perpetuity, have him show up. And look, he's great, dude. He's great as Wolverine. I've got no problems with him as Wolverine. So, and I think he helped this movie a bunch too. The fact that this is a heavy Hugh Jackman movie was all good. This was good.
My only complaint about Hugh Jackman is about half a foot. That's about the only thing I can say against him.
He's just he's a mountain in these, especially with how jacked he is too. He's just huge. So that's that movie. Let me see, where do I think, man, I don't know if I don't even want to try and compare this to a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie.
No, let's not do that.
I can't do it. I can't even do it.
Let's stay in the X-verse. Yeah,
I can't do it.
I saw the end of the world. I could feel all this death.
Jean, it was just a dream.
You wander through the willows in the forest you have found.
I've been called many things over many lifetimes.
Trying to hide.
Ra, Krishna, Yahweh.
Ever since the world found out about mutants, there have been secret societies who see them as some kind of second coming or sign of God. They believe that tens of thousands of years ago, an ancient being was born, the world's first
mutant.
You are all my children, and you're lost because you follow blind leaders. But I am here now. I'm here for you.
Wherever this being was, he always had 4 followers he would imbue with power.
Like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You got that one from the Bible.
Or the Bible got it from him.
What is it? Oh, God. He can control all of us.
Charles!
The world needs the X-Men.
That's why I'm here. To fight.
Not all of us can control our powers.
Then don't. This is war.
Everything they've built will fall!
survivors of their world, we'll build a better one.
I've never felt power like this before.
So the only X-Men movie that the Marvel Superheroes podcast has ever been devoted to, where we did a whole episode about just a single movie in this franchise, was X-Men Apocalypse. And you were not present for that. That was me and Mr. Fixit. And so from that and other conversations, I believe I can recall that Fixit liked the first two movies. He very much did not like Apocalypse, and he hated Dark Phoenix as well, to just show where he's at. Having re-listened to that podcast, I have to more or less agree with Mr. Fixit's issues with Apocalypse. I enjoyed the movie a lot more than him the first time I watched it, but on second viewing, I drug it out as long as I could. I watched chunks of this movie over the course of the better part of a month because it was just a real struggle for me to get through the second viewing. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts since you're coming into this cold and you weren't in that episode.
So here, and this is gonna be, I think this is a common thing in all of these podcasts that we do. I can be more forgiving for movies that are not 4 hours long, and that is one thing that all these X-Men movies, and we've already talked about it a little bit. None of these movies are like crazy long. And what's the runtime for X-Men Apocalypse?
Part of the problem, 144 minutes. So you're looking at about 2.5 hours.
Nah, but I want to say, because there's no stinger in this movie, I don't think.
No, there is. There's a stinger in this one.
Is there a stinger in this one?
But there is a stinger. We talked about it in the episode.
Okay, so but again, it's not 3 hours. So this is a longer movie, but I was able to kind of roll with it. I thought the effects were not terrible still. I think they're still lagging behind Marvel, but I thought they were still okay. Let me run through some of my notes here. Okay, so I did not like this movie. This movie was not good. And unfortunately, if I remember Mr. Fixit's criticisms, a lot of it goes from jump. You just can't buy into Apocalypse because he's just so tiny. He's just the look is all wrong. So that it just, especially when you compare it to Thanos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like you just screwed the pooch on Apocalypse. I mean, he's supposed to be the biggest, most intimidating villain they've got, and he's just none of that for this movie. I'll say the opening scene I thought was really good. I thought all the Egyptian costumes looked great. I liked the whole as he's trying to beam his body to another younger healing factor body, which was dumb. But as they were doing that, and they all go, the heist to get them all trapped in there was awesome, and the falling rocks are like smashing those mutants. It was super, super violent. I liked all that stuff. I thought that was great. And I was like, okay, this is like a pretty good start to this movie. But once Apocalypse starts showing up on the screen, it's hard, dude. Because anytime he walks into a scene and you see other characters, he's the shortest guy on the set. But then whenever they do a close up and they're talking, you can tell they put him on some phone books, and now they're either eye to eye or he's a little bit taller. And I'm like, even when he meets Storm for the first time, she's like taller than him. But then when he's like trying to intimidate her later and like gives her powers, he's like standing a foot taller than her. And I'm like, bro, the scene you just cut from where he walked into her room, she was legit taller than like I can't not see that, because Apocalypse is supposed to be this gigantic, intimidating figure, and I can't get over it. And it just made me think he should have been more like Xerxes from 300. That's if you were going to do like a real Egyptian take on Apocalypse without going absurd CGI, which probably would have been a mistake. You got to do something like Xerxes from the 300 movies.
And they did that in the comics too, because there were, I think, a couple of miniseries that Adam Polina drew. I think they were called The Rise of Apocalypse or something, and that's where they really started to enforce the Sabanur thing. And he was in that vein. He wasn't as ornamented as Xerxes was, but there's enough similarity there. He was a skinny, half-naked guy, blue skin. You could have done that. That would have been a way to go.
And that's when I think Storm points out to so Apocalypse is going around, right, and he's trying to like recruit all these mutants to make his 4 horsemen or whatever. And that's where they showed, I don't know, she's got a poster up in her room.
Yeah, she's
just
my
like
hero,
Mystique. Yeah, Mystique's face. She's like, you're the hero. She's the hero. And then later on, Nightcrawler meets her for the first time, and Nightcrawler's like, you're the hero. And she's like, she's Katniss, is what it is. She's Katniss Everdeen from the
Hunger Games,
Chasing Mockingbird movies, or whatever the hell they were called. That's who she is, and she's this face of the revolution. And they caught the glimpse of her on TV and all. And she's now, and I'm just like, I just don't like any of this. Like, I'm sorry, I just don't like any of this. So
I just want to say, I actually got into an argument on Twitter with some women who were really upset by the casting of the actress who played Storm. I think her name is Alexandra Shipp. Yeah, because she was too light-skinned, and because Hollywood always favors having more light-skinned actors, and she's supposed to be African, so she should be darker skinned. We saw that thought was put into the Black Panther movie where you had darker skinned actors, which is great and commendable. But also Storm is an iconic visual who is typically represented as having, brown skin of not a lighter hue, but varied hues that are still not Black Panther levels of darkness. And so they were arguing against the actress, and my argument was, look, this actress has already been cast. It's not completely foreign to her representation in the comic books. So you're basically campaigning to get this actress fired because you want somebody with darker skin. I wasn't entirely on board with that. But in rewatching the movie and also just thinking about the matter more, when she's pointing to a poster of the white woman and saying that she's the hero, and the actress herself is a very light-skinned woman to be playing an African, born individual. And there's just, honestly, her command of the African accent, while not, I believe it's supposed to be Kenyan, while not as bad as Halle Berry's, is still not great. And so it's like, I kind of start to see their point after a while. It's like, this isn't a great representation of Storm. I don't appreciate that she gets the white hair because Apocalypse gives it to her. And I don't see what he does to make her any more powerful. And she's a real puss in the movie, just like all the Horsemen of Apocalypse, who should be like these devastating forces and you're scared to death. There's only 4 of them plus Apocalypse, and they should be taking on all the X-Men and being formidable enemies. And instead, they're getting knocked out fairly easily with the arguable exception of Psylocke. I definitely started to see a lot of those ladies' points and Mr. Fixit's points about the problems with this movie. And one of them is the continuing Mystique being such a pivotal figure and diminishing a truly important X-Men character like Storm, to benefit Mystique.
Yeah, I mean, that's your lane. I didn't have any issue with her. I didn't have any issue with them looking up to Mystique because, like, it's not about, like, skin color. It's the mutant is the race there.
Sure.
And
see,
she's blue. I mean, I get it,
but
dude.
Here's the thing, though. The X-Men, when they were first conceived, they were kind of a knockoff of the Doom Patrol, and they were just sort of like freaks of nature, and that was the angle. It wasn't until Roy Thomas came in that they really started to emphasize mutants as a minority group and as a persecuted group, which is funny because Roy Thomas is a Gentile and Stan Lee is a Jewish, and it was the Gentile who came up with that angle. But fine. In the time that those characters were created, you did not have many faces of color in the comic books. You did not have many ethnicities. Even though, as a Jewish man, Stan Lee was writing most of those characters, the vast majority of the Marvel characters are in no way Jewish, and a lot of that stuff was retconned in years later. And there still aren't very many Jews in the Marvel comics, despite the influence of that culture and the morals and such. But now in the 2020s, to have a franchise that's defined by representation be so white, X-Men so white, that's an issue that has to be addressed, because you can't have all these white people, some fairly Aryan looking motherfuckers too, dominate the X-Men franchise when the whole thing is supposed to be about minorities. And one thing that helped them in the 2000s was that you had a gay director putting gay subtext in the X-Men, which was always there, or at least was there throughout the Claremont run, but became highlighted significantly over the course of the X movies with actual terminology and scenarios that very much mirrored the gay experience. But another issue is that it wasn't so much the gay experience as the male gay experience. Lesbians were not very well represented. We've already talked about Mystique being stripped of that part of her identity. And so as these movies progress, now we're at the 20th anniversary of them, and this is more than 3/4 of the way through at this point, to have the characters still be so white-leaning and so relatively heteronormative, it becomes a problem where it wasn't necessarily one. They evolved the technology, they evolved the continuity, but they haven't evolved the representation in a time where they really needed to do that.
Okay, I mean, that's fine. I didn't have a problem with it, and I thought Storm I thought the casting was fine. Yeah, her accent was bad, but I was more upset with the power set, that she is supposed to be like one of the king shit X-Men, and she gets her powers from amplified by Apocalypse. You know what I mean? They keep changing. Every time they change somebody's origin in these movies, it bothers me. It's always for the worst. It's Magneto got his helmet from the Russians because they had actually made it for Sebastian Shaw, and you're like, what? Like, okay, I guess he got it from Sebastian Shaw. All these little changes suck. Like, they all suck. And this one, that now it's Apocalypse is the one that gave Storm her white hair, and you're like, what? I'm like, what couldn't you just had white hair? Like, what? I don't know. Little details like that bother me. I just think that the fact that, to me, I don't like it because it's just the character of Mystique, and I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? I feel like it's supposed to be this Xavier Eric Lynchier thread, and it's all Mystique, and I just don't understand why. It's just such a, like I said, I just am puzzled by the choice that she's the hero, she's the one, and you know, it's not about Xavier getting the school for the gifted. In fact, he's fucking all these kids up. Like that's all he does is he's doing horrible things. He's a junkie and he's an alcoholic, and he's just not good in any of he's terrible in all these movies. And everybody hates him. By the end of these 4 films, everybody hates this guy. And I'm like, okay, so we're just shitting on Xavier in all these films. Eric Lynchier is just a limp dick. We don't know what he's doing from movie to movie. And it's Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique. She's the one. And then it's literally like, she's the hero. Oh, she's the face of mutant kind.
And
to
it's
me,
funny,
it's
too,
just
because she's like literally, you're not seeing the face of mutant kind, because at this point Jennifer Lawrence will put on the makeup as little as possible through these movies and is constantly representing herself as a blonde chick. So the actress is giving an increasingly tired performance. You can tell she's not into it by this movie. And so it's like you're putting more and more on her at a point where you really need to be seeing less and less of her because she's detracting from the movies besides her star power.
Yeah, that's what the problem I have with it. And I'm just like, okay, we're doing this now. She is it. She's the poster child for the mutant cause for whatever reason. You know what I mean? It can't be this aspirational, we're trying to get into this school for the gifted, and the other half of mutants are idolizing Magneto for his radical waves. Nope, can't be that. It's got to be like, it's just, I just, the whole thing is not, it's just not my deal. I don't know. I just don't get it. It's just bizarre choices. And then I have a note here that just says, James McAvoy sucks. And so I'm going to go talk about this now. I think James McAvoy sucks. I don't like him as Professor Xavier. I don't know if it's the source material is making it's so effective at making me hate the character. I don't like the actor either, but I feel like the way he talks in that smarmy British accent is not good. It's not the Patrick Stewart British where everything he says, I'm just like, oh man, that's so awesome. I wish, that's the kind of British person you hear talking. You're like, damn, I wish I had a British accent. Whereas James McAvoy's British accent makes me want to punch him in the face. Like I can't stand him. Like, and so at this point, I was like, I'm out on James McAvoy. I cannot stand this dude. I don't want to see him any more of these movies. And there was a whole other movie after this. I don't like the dude. And I don't know if I've ever seen any other films with him as the actor, but if he's the star in any other movies, I'm not watching them either. Because I just feel like he's the same. His cadence is the same when he's talking to everybody. And it's like he's being Britishly sarcastic to every character in all these movies. Even when he's supposed to be like lovey-dovey towards like a young Jean Grey, it still feels like he's being some sarcastic slacker or something. I don't know. There's just something about it. Not the right dude. He's not the right dude. Whereas before, in watching like trailers and stills, I thought they nailed it. I thought he was like, I was looking forward to watching this dude's portrayal of young Charles Xavier. And now watching these movies, in my opinion, he's one of the worst parts of these movies. And maybe that's a controversial thing. I don't know, but I can't stand this dude.
This may be a good transition to Dark Phoenix. As I've said, I did not like the portrayal of the character in First Class or in Days of Future Past. And, in going into this movie, he's got that gigantic flock of seagulls coif going on. And it's driving me so nuts because it's one thing to choose not to use aging makeup, but to not even let Magneto get the white hair that he's known for and that he had in the other movies, and to not have Xavier go bald. It was a choice that was just infuriating to me. And it bothered me so much in Apocalypse 2 with him continuing to run around with the hair that whole time. But once the hair is finally gone, as they show him in the trailers for Apocalypse, I think he looks so fucking good. I love the fucking eyebrows. I like his body because it looks a lot like Xavier's body. He was kind of a lean guy. And Picard, Patrick Stewart, he's great as the older Professor X, but in some ways he's such the kindly person. I think Xavier has always been a guy who you had to have questions about and who did a lot of questionable things. And I like that McAvoy gives him that little bit of an edge and gives him that ulterior quality. And once he's finally looks like Xavier, which is my main problem, is he just doesn't even look like the character, and he's walking around for 3 fucking movies and he's just not doing the stuff he's supposed to do to play that character. It's like the filmmakers are intentionally not letting him manifest the character onto the fucking screen. But once he's finally in the chair and he's finally bald and he's finally becoming that more mentor type figure that he's always supposed to have been, he's finally becoming a teacher instead of like the junkie, frat boy hanging out with Mystique at bars and all this kind of dumb stuff. Then he becomes Xavier for me. And so for me, the last last quarter of Apocalypse and into Dark Phoenix is the only time I finally get to see him play that character. And I like James McAvoy. He's been in a bunch of stuff. He was in Wanted. He was in Glass and the Split, and he's in a lot of movies. He's one of those actors like Ewan McGregor who just does a ton of stuff and kind of plays similar type of characters too. I like him fine, but he finally becomes Xavier toward the end, and I'm way more into him once he's got the bald head and he actually looks and acts the part finally. And it takes really until Dark Phoenix before you start to see that.
Can I let me run through some notes
Sure.
on Apocalypse real quick before we move to, since we did do a whole podcast on it. So let me see. Where was it? Okay. And this, I talked about this earlier. The fact that they have where Magneto has got a whole new family, and then he's working in like a steel mill or whatever, some sort of metallurgy factory, industrial deal. And he saves one of his coworkers by using his powers, and that's when the freaking jig is up. And they come to his house. They tell the police. The police come to his house. They take his daughter. They're like, "You're coming with us." Blah 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 blah. Right. And then the dude and they've got like bows and arrows because they don't want to use metal and stuff. And then they accidentally kill his wife and daughter with one arrow, and now he's lost everything. And all I could think of was, why? Like, did we need more motivations for Magnus, for Eric Lynch here at this point? Like, I don't understand. And that's the other thing. These movies just repeat over and over and over again. It's like you got to have a teleport guy in every movie has a different teleport guy.
Or in Apocalypse, you got 2 teleport guys because Apocalypse can teleport and so can Nightcrawler.
Exactly. So they can just pop in and out of all these places. First Class, it was the person I guess we thought was Nightcrawler's dad, Zazu, whatever his name was, going all around. Like, all these movies, you got to have a teleport guy. It's got to have a central threat. Magneto's bad guy. Xavier's good guy. They don't get along and they join together. We got to go get Magneto to join together to fight. It's the same shit in every single one of these movies. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, it's maddening. Mm-hmm. It's maddening, dude.
And that's when I was talking about reevaluating Apocalypse on that second viewing. That was my problem, was after watching First Class and then Days of Future Past and then Apocalypse, to see that same cycle over and over and over again. And you didn't have that in the original movies because they spread around the love a lot more. You had the story of like the love triangle between Bobby and Rogue and Kitty Pryde, and you had all the stuff with Wolverine, and you had a lot of other things happening, and Bobby having to deal with his parents, and was Pyro going to turn evil? And you actually dealt with the school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in these movies, it's just Magneto and Mystique and Xavier over and over again, never really progressing, somehow having to reset Magneto every single time. But especially in Apocalypse, there's no way that dude did not kill hundreds of thousands of people. And in the comic books, they were constantly hammering at the 200 Russian soldiers that died when he sank a submarine in like 1980, and he had to get put on trial for it and all this stuff. And there's like, this dude's killing like Thanos numbers now. And we're still supposed to be, oh, cool, you go off and do your thing. We're not going to come and hunt you down. Go have a family. And again, the thing with the family, like I remember the first time I watched the movie, it kind of choked me up when they killed the family. Watching it the second time, I was like you. I was like, come on, man. And that was from one of the classic X-Men backup stories. And it was a great, very effective backup story. It was even greater though, because in the original story, there's a twist. And at some point, I think we might do some of those, so I don't want to get into it, but it was a much better story and better told. And it happens at a time, I think, before Magneto and Xavier meet. So it makes sense because it's part of his progression to becoming Magneto. But as you said, he's already been Magneto for years now. And so this wishy-washy stuff, this is a guy by Apocalypse, I think is supposed to be in his 50s, at this point. And he's still like, am I going to be, and Mystique has usurped him and become what he's supposed to be in the comics and all this stuff. It's like, why do we need Magneto? Why do we have this triangle? Why are these movies about Xavier and Magneto and Mystique? They're not. They're called X-Men. It's supposed to be about the team, not about these dudes. And they somehow managed to, like, they must think the audience is just enraptured with the story of Magneto. And I think the returns on Apocalypse and especially on Dark Phoenix show, no, they're not. These movies are not supposed to be about these guys. You're supposed to have the one movie that's a prequel, and then we're supposed to get back to the X-Men. And you guys just keep stalling on showing stories about the people we actually care about and taking their roles and giving them to other people that we're just not that into.
And let me play off this before I forget too, because you were talking about the Bobby relationship, and you had the Logan and Scott and Jean relationship, and so they had like, and the Rogue stuff, that stuff was all there. And these movies do some of the biggest faults in these movies are these weird like love stuff, like the Xavier Moria McTaggart stuff is all wrong. Right. It's all wrong in all these movies.
He wipes her mind for 20 years. That's not the basis of a good relationship.
But when they talk about how, hey, let's go see Moria McTaggart, and he's like, oh, okay, let's go, and he gets there and he's like stammering, and it's just like, what? what, dude? Like, you upended everything you were doing to go, like, that's weird. And then, but he's also kind of got something with Mystique. There's some weird, like, it's not brother sister.
It is to him. Actually, that's part of the problem, is that it is brother sister to him. Mystique wanted more than that, and what's weird is that they do the whole Beast thing, but again, they go decades without seeing each other, and Beast is, I guess, chased this entire time because he apparently never gets with anybody else ever over all those years. And what? It just doesn't make any damn sense.
It's him obsessed with her more than anything.
Really,
they try to act like it was. There's
reciprocity in the first movie, in First Class, and then afterwards, it's all him.
Yeah, and then in the last movie, it gets real weird. And then but then there's also something between her and Magneto. It's just really,
except there's not. Really, he goes off and has a whole other family and all this kind of stuff.
It's just I don't get it, dude. I'm like, how did you kind of get this part right? Because even the Marvel movies didn't really get this right. You know, they tried to do the Natasha Bruce Banner stuff.
Yeah, that was bad.
But I think they were like, oh, that's not working, and they scrapped it. Whereas here they like, let's double down. We're gonna keep doing it, and I'm just so weird, man. I mean, like,
well, and again, the love story is Xavier and Magneto, except nobody's putting out memes of that because nobody's into that. Nobody's into those characters, especially as they're portraying these movies. So stop. But they won't stop. They're just so, because the same people doing these movies over and over again, and it's the same movie, the same cycle over and over again. So where I could watch Apocalypse as an isolated viewing and be able to enjoy it under those terms, watching it in a series, as part of a series, and watching it in the context of having watched the other two movies very recently, I'm just loathing it because they just keep making the same mistakes. And in the broader sense, they're telling the exact same story over and over again.
Okay, a few more of my points for Apocalypse so we can get the hell out of Apocalypse. Let me see. When Archangel turns into Archangel to Four Horsemen by Metallica, excellent job. That's what I'm here for, people. Whenever you do your period pieces, I'm talking to you, Wonder Woman 84, that's what you're supposed to fucking do. When you put a movie in the 80s, that's what you're supposed to do. Find some 80s songs and put them in the movie. Let me see. Apocalypse's height keeps changing. It's super annoying.
I will point out, though, that one of Apocalypse's powers is to change size. And I know you only see that in the mental plane, but it is something he could do in the comic books. He could get smaller if he needed to. They don't give any explanation for why his voice is so terrible, though. And not like Oscar Isaac's, terribly miscast, though.
Yeah, awful. When they're leaving Star Wars, and I think, is it Gene that says, at least we can all agree the third movie is always the worst. And I was like, are they taking a shot at themselves since they're the third movie in this series and they know this movie sucks? Did you catch that line?
We talked about it in the podcast. Yeah, it's stupid. Okay, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, except that they're taking shots at themselves because they're in the third movie. And it does make sense. Let me see. Yeah, Apocalypse like backfeeds into Xavier and tells all these people to launch nukes. He'd never seen a telepath before, but every fucking character in the X-Men universe is a telepath. That's weird.
He literally has Psylocke on his team.
Yeah, exactly.
And why?
Quicksilver
look, I just have to say too, because I don't think it came up the last time.
Okay.
Why does she even have the Psyblade before she meets Apocalypse? She could have just been a telepath, and then he gives her the Psyblade.
Yeah.
But no, she can already project the thing like 4 feet or something. So I guess she can project it 20 feet now.
Yeah. And Apocalypse amplifying Magneto's powers. I got no, none of this is good. I don't like any of this. Okay. The Quicksilver scene was fantastic, where he's saving everybody from the to Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics or whatever. Mm-hmm. Fantastic scene. Once again, Quicksilver steals the movie.
Highlight, certainly, even though I argue against that particular choice of song, but it's still cool.
Oh, get out of here, dude. It's an 80s movie. Let me see. I'm almost done. Oh, when they free Wolverine in the building, where she can feel there's like an animal presence and Wolverine's in there. To me, that ground the movie to a halt, because it was just like before, where Professor X says, "Oh, when you meet me, I'm not going to have my powers," and I'm spending the whole time trying to think, like, why doesn't he have his powers? Here, they just have it so Hugh Jackman can appear in the movie, but instantly I'm thinking, wait a second, he kills Stryker. He goes after Stryker when you know what I mean? Like, all I'm doing is I'm remembering X-Men Origins Wolverine when he breaks out, and I'm trying to think, like, wait a second, why Jean Grey frees the X-Men free Wolverine from the Weapon X program, not when they inject him full of the adamantium? Oh, that's all I could think about was, wait a second, you changed something else? Because this is way worse. Mm-hmm. That it's just, I pulled the pin out and he just runs out, and I'm like, huh? And then she like gives him some of his memories so that he can run off, and I'm like, okay, like this is terrible. And then they run to the hangar, and there's just like light suits there that's all their size, and they all put them on, and now they're in X-Men costumes, and I'm like, this is terrible. And so now basically Mystique is the original leader of the first X-Men team, and she's an inspiration to all the mutants, and it's so weird. Yeah, and then my last note here is Beast Mystique is super creepy and weird, and I think it's weird that they refuse to change that Mystique is naked all the time.
But that's just it. She's not naked all the time. They started having her running around the awful-looking X-Men suits and just having a little bit of makeup at the top.
On, yes,
yeah. So
or she's just human.
Yeah.
When they could have just had her be blue, but in a costume for all of these movies. But I mentioned that earlier.
Put the dots on her face and CGI it.
Ladies and gentlemen of NASA, this is Charles Xavier. Help is on the way.
We're doing space missions now. Cool.
We get the astronauts, we bring them home. Go!
Heat signature's rising fast.
We gotta get out of here.
Where's Jean?
Where is she?
She should be dead.
Did you hear what the kids are calling you? Phoenix.
Hello, Jean. Who are you? The better question is, who are you?
Something's happening to me.
When I lose control, bad things happen. But it feels good. That power destroyed everything it ever came into contact with. Until you. The X-Men fear you. And what they fear, we seek to destroy.
She'll kill us all.
The girl dies.
She's still our friend.
She's not Jean anymore.
Are you threatening me?
That's right.
That would be a bad idea.
My Dark Phoenix story. Obviously, I did not see this in theaters. This was out before COVID, I think, and so it had nothing to do with that, and more to do with just a lack of interest and just terrible buzz, terrible word of mouth. The whole thing where they kept moving the release dates and stuff, and it kept being in competition with New Mutants as to whether or not either of the movies would ever be released. And of course, by that point, the Fox sale had gone through, and we all knew that this was a lame duck franchise. These would be the last X-Men movies. There was a lot of concern about Simon Kinberg remaking Dark Phoenix Saga again, having been one of the writers on the previous pass, and once again them not really grasping what that material needed to be. So there's a lot of reasons not to go see this movie. But I did finally catch it on cable within the last year, and I thought, okay, well, I saw it fairly recently, maybe not need to see it again. The main problem though is I found that it was not available for streaming, and having watched a lot of those like online parodies and commentaries and stuff, I realized how little the movie I remembered, even having seen it within the last year. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have to watch it again, except it's not available to stream. And I just refuse to pay to rent a movie that I know I saw for free on cable in such, relatively recently. So after a lot of searching through all the streaming options, and so I started searching porn sites trying to find Dark Phoenix, and I finally found it on an Italian site where unfortunately it was in Italian. And so my compromise was I will watch the movie while listening to mine and Mr. Fixit's commentary on Apocalypse, and we'll see how that works. And I feel confident that I can approach this movie with an awareness of what happens in it and be able to judge it critically based on that particularly bizarre hybrid experience. Now, you also probably found that it wasn't available for streaming, so how did you view this movie?
Mr. Fixit has the streaming rights to this movie, and I borrowed it from him.
That was easier?
Yeah, it was very easy. But at first I was just like, why isn't this on Disney Plus?
Right.
That's
I could have
weird.
sworn it was on Disney Plus. Maybe I just kept looking at Apocalypse over and over again and assuming it was there, but I could have sworn within the last month it was still on Disney Plus.
Yeah, and so I don't know what the deal is with that. But I mean, luckily I found it, so this was not that big of a deal for me. But I did think it was strange. But
yeah, who wants this that would keep it from being available streaming somewhere?
Yeah, that's what I didn't understand. It was like, why are we keeping this back from the world? I don't understand.
Again, I have cable, which means I have, on-demand options. I have the ability to record this off of one of the pay channels. I have most most of the major streaming services, and it's absolutely inaccessible without a $4 rental that I refuse to pay. I know it's only $4. I'm not an impoverished individual. It was the principle of the matter. How dare a movie as broadly disliked as Dark Phoenix ask me to pay more money to see it?
Yeah, so weird. I do think, I wonder if maybe I could have VPN'd around and found it. Maybe it's showing somewhere else. I don't know. But that was definitely strange. I'm not really sure why. Like, you figured, let's just do this. Like, put it out there. This movie bombed, so who cares? Whatever.
I believe this is the only movie of the franchise that lost money, and it lost a considerable amount of money, something along the lines of $150 million.
Woo.
Yeah. Well, once you figured marketing costs and then pushing the dates over and over again, apparently, I mean, they claimed the movie's budget was $200 million, which is not on the fucking screen. So I don't know.
So this was weird, and I probably could have said this in the Age of Apocalypse section too, but like, I understand Jean Grey was a main character in the first 3 X-Men movies, right? But it just felt weird to me to put her back in the movie with a different actor, and everybody was kind of just supposed to be like, oh, that's Jean. You know what I mean? I don't know. There was something about that she sort of just shows up in Age of Apocalypse, and she's Jean Grey. And I don't know. For me, I don't know. There was something about that where I'm like, I think they kind of screwed up here. Because at this point, when Age of Apocalypse came out, it was so long since Last Stand. Yeah, since Famke Janssen. It's so long ago. And you know what I mean? And this actress is so recognized as being a character from the Game of Thrones shows that I don't know, for her to just be like, oh, she's Jean Grey. I don't know. There was something weird about that to me that I feel like they didn't even, like, I don't know. Something was not right.
It's only been a dozen years, and you're doing essentially a remake after a dozen years. So to not have the same actress play the part, and to not get an actress that in any way resembles the previous actress in a movie that's supposed to be in the same continuity. But I gotta say this, I think part of the problem is, no offense to Sophie Turner, but she's nobody's favorite Game of Thrones character. Right. There's not a lot of Sansa stands out there. And Jean Grey isn't the most dynamic character to begin with. And one of the things that was great about Famke Janssen is she just has such an interesting look. And surprisingly, given, she was known for, playing girlfriends or over-the-top characters like Xena Onatoppin, when she played the character, she was able to project a surprising amount of intelligence. They recast her as a scientist in the X-Men movies, and you bought it, even though this is a model turned actress playing this character. And again, she had such distinctive features that a lot of what you needed that character to be was on the screen just to look at her. And Sophie Turner, while being an attractive woman, doesn't convey a lot inherently just that looking at her, aside from the fact that whoever was costuming her kept giving her a size too small for some reason. Well, I could guess of 2 reasons why they were doing that, but I don't approve of them. She doesn't bring a lot to the character, and there isn't a lot for her in the script. And so, having advocated for moving the story away from Professor X and Magneto, when you're moving the story to one of the least interesting characters, with one of the smaller fan bases, despite her big role within the X-Men universe and comics and so forth, maybe not the way to go. I think that's putting a lot on very narrow shoulders, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, there should have been some sort of torch passing from Mystique to Jean or something, because Jean kind of became she was Xavier's right-hand man in the original 3 X-Men, right?
Right.
Her
and Cyclops both.
Yeah, Beast is that in these movies, where they're like, he's his Igor. You know what I mean? Beast is his Igor, building all of his technology and giving him serums, and throughout all these decades, it's him and Beast.
And they did the weird thing too in the last movie where they try to make a Cyclops kind of a cocky rebel, and that's never been who Cyclops has been in the comics. And then in this movie, he still looks way too young, and he's got those pouty lips, and all he does is pine for Jean, which is all he needs to do in a Dark Phoenix story. But again, we probably don't need to tell the Dark Phoenix story again. And so it diminishes his character because he doesn't have a lot to do besides get in the way, essentially, of dealing with the problems that Jean is manifesting. And while they go back to the well of Xavier's mind blocks and all this other kind of stuff, one of the things that's important about the Dark Phoenix saga in the comics was that this is an old school, innocent character, this heroine, who is being made to do these horrific things things by this outside force. It's sort of like a play on The Exorcist. It's not her fault that this is happening, but the X-Men movies repeatedly make it her fault and make it about mental instability and her having too much power, and she bitch be crazy is what they keep doing. And that's not a healthy story that you can expect people in the modern era to embrace, because that shit's been done so many times in Hollywood, and it's not up the path forward for the X-Men. And the fact that they already done the story and they were doing it again a dozen years later, really. I think the last time was 2006. They're doing it again in 2018. It's just a very, very bad call.
Yeah, and let's face it, at this point, you can check off more characters that you don't like than you do like. Because Hank is, Hank McCoy's kind of an asshole in all these movies too. I don't know what his motivations are. Weird. He's got these weird obsessions with Mystique, and he's ashamed of being a mutant, and he's, it's just all sorts of weird shit with him. And Xavier is doing all sorts of. He's a habitual line stepper in all these movies.
Well, one of the good things about this movie, though, is at least they finally bring that to the fore. Instead of forgiving him, they actually call him to account finally in this movie in a way that he never was in the previous movies. So that's something.
Yeah, but
it still makes the movie about him when it shouldn't be. This is a movie that's supposed to be about Jean, and they're making it about Xavier again.
But the fact that he's doing dumb, questionable shit in every single movie, sure, they call him on it in this one, but he's been doing it in all these movies.
Well,
so
and it's funny, too,
viewer,
because Mystique specifically is calling him on it, and she recognized that, and she left. It's hard to respect Beast having spent 30 years with this guy, and it's only after Mystique is killed off because Jennifer Lawrence has found a way out of this contract that she's stuck in. That's when he finally turns, and it's not about him recognizing the unscrupulous nature of Xavier. It's about him being pissed off that his girlfriend got killed, who wasn't ever even really his girlfriend. So there's a definite creep factor there.
And at this point, I'm kind of out on Mystique's character. Cyclops, I'm with you. I felt not drawn to that actor at all as Cyclops. And then Jean, it's the same thing. She's doing all this shit because she's kind of like, it's like deep down you're actually a bad person, and it's like, what? Like, I don't like any of you. Like, you're all terrible. Who am I rooting for? Like, please bring Hugh Jackman back, because I'm out on all you guys. Anyway, but I will say though, the opening scene with the flashback of the car accident with Jean's family and stuff was excellent, well done, and was super, super brutal.
I'm on the side of a lot of these horrific moments in the movie actually being effective. I actually like the whole Xavier being forced to walk up the stairs with his twisted legs and everything. I know a lot of people laughed about that, but I saw a lot of horror in those sequences, and I think that sometimes this works better as a horror movie than it does as any other kind of movie.
I mean, I don't know if we can really even talk about the plot of this movie. This movie, I should say, let me see, I think I looked at what the runtime was.
I'm going to say I'm opposed to talking about the plot. It's The Last Stand again, except this time there's more. There's a lot of people who died in both of the movies, but the deaths are more brutal. One thing that's interesting with the last two movies is how bloody this is and how much they push the PG-13 rating on these movies. But this time they're also fighting alien Terminator creatures that you're not going to invest in. And while everybody's thinking that they're going to get to see Jessica Chastain play the White Queen, she's not. She's just an alien. And they do her makeup to make her look more alien than usual. But she doesn't have a lot to do besides trying to steal Phoenix's power from her and the complications that come from that. And the fact that she's surrounded by alien Terminator cannon fodder for Magneto to kill, because again, they drag Magneto into this, all over again. And there's a guy who I think by this point is supposed to be in his 50s or 60s, and he's still locked off on an island somewhere living in shipping containers. He is a loser. He is absolutely Quicksilver's father. He is the guy who spawns a kid who still lives in his mom's basement in his 30s, okay?
Yeah, where's Asteroid M, right? Like, he's living on an island with shipping containers, and they're trying to find potable fucking water and stuff because they've got asylum on this little island, dude. Like,
the first hurricane that rolls in, they're toast,
Yeah, but so I like the Jean Grey origin sequence. I thought that was really well done, very impactful.
And it was interesting to see the X-Men as the national heroes for a change, except for the way that it wrecks the continuity, because again, you look at the earlier X-Men movies and these guys are pretty well on the down low, and now you've got Mystique action figures and stuff, but it's cool to see, and it's interesting, and it's optimistic. So it at least that changes up the formula for once.
Yeah, and I thought the whole scene where they take the Blackbird, although they call it the X-Jet, which I was like, what? Did they call it the X-Jet in all these movies? Like, that was really weird.
Nah, I think it's Blackbird pretty much. Yeah,
it's a Blackbird. I'd never heard the term X-Jet before. I'm like,
I think they're leaning into the superheroes. We're superheroes now.
But when them flying out into space and having to stop the, I thought Cyclops putting his eyes in the cannon to shoot. I thought that was kind of cool, and I liked all that. I thought the effects looked good. I was down for that whole scene. They got the Bamf effect for Nightcrawler is down. Like, I loved him bamfing around in the little haze of smoke. Excellent. I thought, like I said, the whole shuttle scene I thought was really good. So they backed up the Jean sequence with the shuttle sequence, and I'm like, okay, like this isn't so bad so far. Then they come back to Earth, and Mystique is just like shitting on Professor Xavier because
Jean nearly died, and he's getting all celebrity and everything.
Yeah, and she says, the women around here do all the saving. Maybe we should change the name to the X-Women. And I'm just like, who wrote this movie? Do you just hate all of the X-Men? Like, I don't know. It just felt like the people, like, I don't know. This is like a hate watch, or this was like somebody who wrote this movie. To me, this was like Snyder making a Superman movie where the whole movie's shitting on Superman, even though it's like about him and he's the guy who saves the day. For some reason, he just looks like shit throughout the whole thing. That's kind of how this movie was, where it's like all these characters are like the worst possible manifestations of themselves, where it's, Professor X is fucking with everybody's heads and he's just this horrible person. And I don't know. It was just like the whole concept of the X-Men is really him risking these kids' lives. And it's just like you're pointing it out like in black and white in front of, you're putting Xavier's on display. Like
all the stuff you're supposed to be sweeping under the carpet is what you're spotlighting. Yeah.
You're like literally you're creating a superhero team out of kids to get fame for yourself, but you're risking the kids' lives. You never go out with them. And I'm just like, gross. You don't have to say it. Like I get it. It'd be like,
I've got a really nice house. Why don't you follow me to the bathroom and you see the flecks of shit in my toilet?
I know exactly. And it's like, oh, like somebody again. You don't need to say it. You know what I mean? It would be like in a Batman movie if Alfred called Bruce Wayne out for being a creep who sits in his cave and risks Robin's life. Like we know it's weird. You don't have to point it out in the movie. That you would point this out in some deconstruction of like the boys would point this out, right? Like if there was an X-Men team in the boys universe, somebody would be pointing it out there. Where there's a dude getting off on watching these kids like Suicide Squad themselves, where it's like, yeah, I'm teaching them, I'm their teacher, quote unquote, and I'm sending them off and I'm reaping all the benefits. And I'm like, no, this is actually Professor X. It was very strange.
Well, and also the timeline comes into effect again because they're having a kegger out in the woods, right? But we were introduced to them as teenagers 10 years ago. These are people in their mid-20s now. Why isn't Jean going for her doctorate? Why isn't Cyclops, becoming like at least a gym instructor or something? Why hasn't Storm progressed beyond being somebody whose eyes go white and occasionally fires some ineffectual electricity, Why aren't these characters manifested yet after, again, they were introducing some of these people, I think 20 years in their timeline, back in their timeline, and they're still not in a place where they feel like they're the X-Men from the very first X-Men movie.
Yeah. Again, the timeline at this point is just so destroyed. Even though they tried to start it from scratch, it's like somehow worse. How do you do that? The scene with Jean and her dad was really jacked up. Yeah, like really, really messed up. Like this might be the darkest of all these movies. Like you said, they seem to get progressively darker and darker, and they go to some weird places. So after the dad scene, that's where Jean goes like full Phoenix, like not full Phoenix, but she has like another one of her mental breakdowns. She's basically fighting all the X-Men, and they kill Mystique. After all these movies, she's fucking dead. I had no idea this happened in this movie because I ignored them so much. I was like genuinely shocked when some of this happened, and it was extremely gruesome. There was a 2x4 sticking out of her chest, covered in gore, dude. And then Hank runs over to her, and he's like freaking out. Like they're all freaking out, and I was freaking out. Like holy shit, because she was like the main character in these movies, and Jean blew her through a 2x4, like wild, dude.
Lawrence gave a good horror face too.
Oh yeah, and it wasn't like a quick like, oh she's dead. She was like kind of alive on the 2x4 for a while. Really gruesome.
Well, you probably figured she's sitting there trying to shapeshift around it or something, and it's just like not working.
Yeah, shapeshift to like a tall person, so it's just like in her leg. Like I don't know.
She got both her hearts, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, like crazy. Then Hank goes nuts on Xavier, and it's like I don't know, like with Psycho on him.
More than that, the fact that he goes out and tracks down Magneto and recruits him with the specific purpose of murdering Jean Grey, one of his students.
Exactly. Well, and then Jean goes to Magnus's or Eric's island, and she's like, I need to know how to stop the killing. And it's like, well, at that point, you've only killed one person, but it should have been like how to contain the rage.
Yeah.
And
maybe don't ask like, mass murderer Magneto how that works.
Yeah, but she says, how do you stop killing? I don't know how to stop. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't know if I would say that. But then, yeah, when Hank gets to the island, so I thought the helicopter scenes were pretty cool. Some practical effects effects there with the helicopters that I thought was neat.
Yeah, see, and that's something I want to mention too, because a lot of those parodies were making fun of the actors standing there and shaking and stuff, and like we're trying to make it seem as though Simon Kinberg was a vastly inferior director. And it's like I think that Brett Ratner on The Last Stand and Simon Kinberg, they both were probably had a great support system, but those movies still all look like Bryan Singer's movies for the most part, at least at the base level. And none of those actors are doing anything silly that they didn't also do for Singer or for Matthew Vaughn. Like the whole thing where, you know, they're always pointing at their temples when they're using their telepathy. They're always doing this kind of stuff. So I think that maybe the sequence was overextended. We spent too much time, you know, fighting to mess around with helicopters. And I know the point of that was to show the difference between the power levels of Jean Grey and Magneto being in the weird position of trying to save humans that Jean's trying to kill. But it doesn't look that bad. It's of a piece with the rest of these movies. So that I think a lot of people were coming into these movies gunning for Simon Kinberg. And it's not like I would want to turn over the keys of the kingdom to him on anything ever again. But I think he did a movie that's definitely of a piece with all the other X-Men movies. And I think a lot of the flaws in this one are inherent to the X-Men movies and why they needed to be put down by Marvel now that Disney owns, you know, them again.
Yeah, but it was so to go back to that. How do you stop the killing? I don't know how to stop. And it was like, dude, you just accidentally killed Raven. Like you didn't put a 2x4 through her. You were like knocking her away, and she fell into it. Like it was an accident. And then Hank goes to talk to Eric, and he's like, I need you to help me find Jean. And he goes, if I find her, I'll kill her. And he goes, I know. And I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Like just off the rails. This movie is off the rails, dude. And then I think Scott tells Magneto at one point, if you touch her, I'll fucking kill you. And I'm like, what? Like, did he just say fucking kill you? Scott Summers said, I'll fucking kill you. I did think that when they were going to get Jean, and you know, it's Professor X and his little of Scott and their kind of squad, and they're all trying to get to Jean, and then it's Magneto, Beast, and whoever the hell else was with them. They're trying to get to them, and he pulls the subway car up through the ground. Now, he could have easily taken any of the cars around there to block the door, but the fact that he reaches down and pulls the subway car up through the ground to block, I thought that was kind of cool. It didn't need to be done, but I thought it looked good, and I thought that it looked, you know, whatever. Jean puppeteering Xavier out of the chair. I know you said you liked it. There was something a little too off-putting. I don't know. Playing with people who are paraplegic is kind of weird. I think she could have levitated him or something, and it would have not been so horror movie. But when she was like, I want you to walk to me, and then he's like no, I was kind of out on that. But it definitely fit the rest of the theme of the movie. I was not surprised they went there because the rest of the movie is kind of like that. It's very much, like you said, this is a horror movie. It's very much horror. Let me see. The alien Groot chick, is she anybody from anything?
I think probably. Maybe she was one of the asparagus people from the planet that she killed in the comics or something, but nothing that warrants them being the antagonists of this movie. Although, let's be honest, Jean's the antagonist of the movie, so, you know.
Yeah. Somebody drops the word mutie. I think one of the security guards calls them a mutie. Had they used the term mutie in any of these movies ever?
Not as pointedly, but I actually want to say maybe they did that in the Deadpool movies instead of the X-Men movies. I don't know.
But the way he said it,
oh yeah,
like, oh yeah, that's
very
the
pejorative.
derogatory way they're supposed to use the yeah. And that was like, whoa, he said it. He said mutie. I thought the whole train fight scene where they're fighting the all the aliens that can't die and stuff. I thought that was all awesome, and they could go full bore, you know, use all their powers to like murder these guys because they are just faceless, unkillable aliens. So, you know, Scott can blast them as hard as he wants, and Eric's doing all sorts of crazy shit with his magnetic powers, like chopping people up, and Beast can go buck wild on him. I like that they could just go unhinged with the powers. I thought it was all good, and I liked Nightcrawler like bamfing the chick in front of the train and then bamfing out so the train hits her, like he jumped in front of it,
stabbing the dude in the neck with his tail like an alien. Yeah.
Oh yeah, when he goes freaking crazy. Yeah, like all that stuff. I was like, I like all this. This all the action beats in this movie were pretty good. Like I said, the opening sequence with the space shuttle and this long one was good. The helicopter one was the weakest one. I get it, but like you said, that was showcasing the power differential here. So I have a note here that just says, I know it's a comic book movie, but this is just an absurd lack of explanation and reasoning to what the fuck is actually going on. And it's because like the main alien chick wants the powers from Jean, and I think it's so that she can like recreate her planet using the powers. But
the problem is that I think they do explain it again. Keep in mind how I most recently watched this movie and how little I remember going into it. My recollection is that she's going to take the power of the Dark Phoenix to recreate recreate her world on Earth out of the raw materials of Earth. So the same way in which they're killing people and taking their identities would be done on a global scale.
Okay, but I don't think that it doesn't show the powers can ever do that. It was
well, I think what it is, but the thing is, the aliens are doing that on a smaller scale with their inherent abilities, just like with the, like genes amped up because of the Dark Phoenix. So they expect to be amped up as well and be able to do it on a larger scale, what they're already doing.
But I didn't think they were procreating. They weren't. I thought it was just they were able to kill someone and take their shape.
Yeah, maybe they've got like the corpses lined up somewhere and they're gonna bring them down and plant them into the humans. I don't know.
But I was just like, okay. And then like she takes some of the powers from Jean because she willingly gives it to her. But they talked about how the power had destroyed everything it had touched.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess because it was being given as like voluntarily from Jean. And why did it pick Jean? We don't know. Like, we don't need to explain it. Like, who cares? Jean's a bad guy now. That's all we're doing here. It's just like it was almost like funny how little time they were spending actually trying to make any sense of what the hell was actually going on. Let me see.
Well, and again, part of the appeal of the story is supposed to be how big and cosmic it gets in a way that the X-Men stories rarely do, where you're bringing in the Shi'ar and the Imperial Guard and all this stuff. And so once again, they're not doing that. So why are you even going here in the first place? I mean they're bringing in aliens, but they're trying to ground them as much as possible and make them meaty, and you see bits of them flying off and they get shot with guns and stuff. So you're not really doing a cosmic story. So why are you adapting a cosmic comic book?
Yeah, and you can argue that this movie has like the smallest scenes where it's like it's happening in a building, kind of on a street, or it's happening on an isolated train car, or it's
and my understanding is
he's lifting stadiums, and it's and Apocalypse is creating cities out of sand and stuff. And this is the intergalactic one,
right?
But it's way more pedestrian in the stuff they're doing.
Well, and my understanding is the Fox executives had come to them and said that they wanted to do something that was more personal and more intimate because of the response they got into Apocalypse. And I tend to agree. Apocalypse's scale was so big and earth-shattering without ever feeling the weight of any of those of that scale. And one of the things that's nice with this movie is because it's smaller scale, the big stuff hits a lot harder in this one than it did in Apocalypse.
No, I totally agree. It's just it's the irony of in the books the Dark Phoenix saga,
right?
And we have galaxy spanning teams and all this stuff, and it's the smallest feeling of all of them, probably even including First Class, where there's nuclear war. And,
First Class had the Hellfire Club, and this one doesn't, even though they were introduced as part of the Dark Phoenix saga.
Right? Yeah. And of course, Eric and Xavier call each other old friend. At this point, if you're taking a shot when they call each other old friend, you're watching these movies, you are dead from alcohol poisoning, because that's what it is. They don't see each other for a while, and they get back together. Here we are again, old friend. Here we are again, old friend. Over and over and over again.
Well, I believe it when Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart say it, because they literally became like BFFs on the X-Men set.
Yeah.
Whereas you do not in any way get that from Fassbender and McAvoy. It's just you don't buy into it. And the end of this movie, there was an alternate ending where Xavier wheels himself out to his specially equipped car and drags himself into the driver's seat and closes his own door and drives away from the school forever. And you get this sense of him being disgraced and having failed. And instead they went with the ending where he's hanging out in like Paris, sipping coffee, and then Magneto shows up. They both play chess again, like they do in all these movies. And it's like, wow, you've done such a great job of making light of all these people dying and all this horrible stuff happening. And it doesn't really matter as long as the two old white guys get to hang out and play chess once again. So it's pretty icky. And that's the ending they actually went with. I think in part because they knew this was the last movie, and I guess they wanted to give it a little bit of an upending, but it's kind of gross.
Yeah, and you see, Phoenix flying, up in the sky or something like that too. I don't know if you could catch that on what you were watching.
Yeah, and they did the voiceover too. Yeah.
So, and that's where the movie ends. And it ends at an hour and 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew that it had a short runtime, because I think the total runtime was like just over 2 hours, and I realized that was that's with all the credits and everything. So I paused it when she's flying through the sky. It's at like an hour 45, and I was shocked that it was only an hour 45 minutes long. And to me, it felt short. My wife disagreed, but I thought that this movie had enough action beats that I enjoyed, and I was like shocking, like horribly dark moments, all of them we've talked about, and like I didn't realize that Jennifer Lawrence gets murdered in this movie and stuff like that, and I was just like, holy shit! And then the movie was over, and I was like, oh wow, so that happened. It was quite the ride.
Yeah, just like with The Last Stand, that's a movie that people hated, and I like it pretty well, in part because I'm just not as as affectionate toward the X-Men as the general audience would be. And I had the same feeling with Dark Phoenix. They were telling a really grim story, so grim that they, wouldn't even let them use the X-Men name on the thing when it was being promoted. This thing went through all those reshoots and all those schedule changes, and it has so much against it to be halfway decent. But I thought the horror worked well. I thought the action worked well. As you said, it was nice and short, so it wasn't such a slog. It was a movie that was largely about Xavier without it, but they're doing it in a different way so that it matters for him to have that much screen time because it's a condemnation of that character and viewing him not through the rose-colored glasses as with the other movies. I love that you're more than 45 minutes through this movie before Magneto shows up. And yeah, it's a bit of a gut punch because you're like, oh my God, you're halfway through an X-Men movie and there's still Magneto and then there's fucking Magneto again. But he's used pretty sparingly. So I didn't really mind him that much. He didn't really have that big of an impact on the movie overall anyway. So I could kind of forget those parts and not worry about it. It's not like I have a loathing of Michael Fassbender or anything. I'm just tired of that dynamic. But that dynamic for the most part isn't there. They shoehorn it into the movie, but it's not that much of a detraction. I think the horror works. I think that, there's this woman's slow descent into, chaos and murder. It's told well enough within the constraints of this universe and of the story. Is it a movie that I'm going to go back to over and over again? No. But I've watched it sort of kind of 1.5 times over the course of the last year. And I definitely would rather watch this one over Apocalypse again. I can assure you, I look forward so much to never watching First Class ever again under any circumstances. Where I could maybe watch this one again. I don't foresee that happening, but it wouldn't be like an actual painful, masochistic thing that I'd be doing to myself if I happen to watch this movie again. I liked it fine. And the fact that I guess because it's so hated and because I had low diminished expectations got to play into this, but I think it's actually a better movie than it's given credit for without actually being 100% a good movie. But for X-Men standards, I would grade it higher than most people, I think.
I'm right with you, dude. I was not expecting. I was like, oh, when I saw the runtime, I was like, oh, thank God this movie's short because I'm going to hate it. It's going to be 2 hours of me hating this movie. And I kind of didn't hate it. And the fact they don't do a lot of explanation, I don't mind that because the movie was only an hour and 45 minutes long. Like, it's when you don't explain stuff in a 3-hour movie, that's when I get really pissed off. If you don't explain it and it's only $1.45, bro, we're good. We're good. I can fill those gaps in because you're doing more choppy, stabby on the train. That's cool. So I'm picturing myself like catching this on cable. And if I turned on cable and it was the scene where they're up in space and Nightcrawler's bamfing back and forth, bro, I'd probably like leave it on the channel. Whereas if I saw First Class on, I would change it as quickly as possible so I don't see any more cringy, horrible beast CGI or Banshee screaming at the ocean.
You have to admit, though, the beast makeup in this movie was way more effective than any since the Kelsey Grammer movie.
Oh, well, no, 100%. That's what I'm saying. Everything was better in this movie, which is what I was not expecting it. I like I said, all the effects were fine. I thought the action, these were some of the best action scenes in any of these movies.
Not being an X-Men fan, it would probably piss me off to see in the train sequence all the X-Men suddenly becoming Wolverine. But as a person who's not really that concerned about it, I'm kind of getting off on seeing them all suddenly turn into Wolverine. It's cool for me.
Yeah. You could let loose finally, and it was fine because they're faceless aliens. So we got to watch them just go crazy. I enjoyed it. I was there for it because that's more interesting to me than, like you said, another conversation between Charles Xavier and Eric. And Jennifer Lawrence. When she died, I was like, oh, this is going to help this movie. This is going to be good. We don't have to hear about this anymore. And she had the nice scene where she was talking to Beast and she's like, that's it. We're the last of the First Class. I'm like, oh, cool. That's a nice little callback. And I'm glad that you're the last of the First Class. And I like that was basically foreshadowing that she was going to get killed. I didn't see that coming. And I was like, okay, cool. So I kind of like this movie. Like, I don't know. And the fact that it was so short.
But really tolerate.
Not like. Well, but there were some scenes in it that I actually liked.
Yeah. If you happen to catch the scenes you liked while you're tossing through the channels, you'll sit and watch those scenes, then you'll move on to something else because you've already seen the movie once. You don't need to watch the whole thing all over again. But you're cool. If for some reason you're trapped somewhere and this is the only movie available, it's like, okay, I'll watch it again. That's cool. I'm good with that.
Yeah. And to contrast it again against Apocalypse, the Quicksilver scene in Apocalypse is easily the best part of that movie, and I'll go watch that on YouTube. But I ain't leaving the channel on for that scene. Okay, like I'm not doing it. Whereas I think I would kind of accidentally leave this on because I would know that in 10 to 15 minutes there's another crazy scene that I forgot about. So I'm like weirdly like this movie, and I don't know. To me, this was what I thought First Class was going to be, and First Class Class is what this movie was supposed to be. I was supposed to like really not like this movie, and I kind of liked it. So now I'm curious. What were the tomometers for these movies?
Oh Lord, I have to look that up. I know this one was the worst. I want to say this was like 28% or something, and then I think at First Class was somewhere in like the 70s or 80s. So yeah, we're definitely coming at this from a different angle than most of the reviewers. But I think that once again, what we're finding is that with a lot of these reviewers, they're fans too. 22%. This is not a 22% movie. I've seen many worse movies get higher ratings than that. These are fans. There are too many. Again, the people who are reviewing movies now were watching the X-Men cartoon as a kid. The fan element has definitely skewed these ratings. If Rex Reed had seen this, well, he hated all these movies. He wouldn't like any of them. But if an actual like serious non-fan prejudiced reviewer were still out there, then I think that they would have given this a much better rating and probably something like First Class a much worse rating. But since there are so many amateur reviewers now and it's an aggregate, so you're taking all these fanboy opinions and these people that are going to give a pass to certain things and glory other things, I think it very much brings this number down where it deserves to be better.
Yeah, I mean, they've got 86% for First Class.
Oh, God. That's better than a lot of the Marvel movies, and they're in no ways First Class. I would be hard-pressed to think of a single Marvel movie that I hate more than having to watch First Class again. It's such a chore to watch that. It's so poorly done and so clearly overrated.
And then the fanboy might be the most overrated of any of these comic book movies we have ever discussed. I mean, I couldn't believe when I was like, when is this movie going to get good? And it never got good. It was just it was cornball, and the dialogue was terrible, and the effects were terrible, and the makeup was terrible. Everything was bad about it. The story was terrible. I don't get it, dude. I just did not get it.
We got shout-outs from Canoes, Dirk Ashton, Richard G. Retweet frantic ones included CH and Talk Nerdy to Me.
Okay, the permanent Marvelite Maximus followers, Comic Deals, Cosmic Critics, David Murphy, Gypsy, Jared Porter, Paid Abad Ndoop, Podcast Promotion 24/7, Queer Spec, home of DecodedPride.com, Super Serious 616, Tony Doris.
Keepers of the Favor's Flame were Brainstorms with a Z, Charlie White Tiger Cancel, Chris William, Del Dracula, Jenna Reagan, Jennifer DeRoss, John Chialo Mulinge, John is Watching Cartoons, MB, Mike Send Aliens to Me, Nick Spence, Orlanderus, Prince of Pandemonium, Relatively Geeky, Richard Field, Ryan Daly, Shanna Banana, Trans Lesbian Planet Eater, Wacky Bronze Silver Age Comic Book Villains, Weird Warriors Podcast, Wolver Steve, and Xenozoic Xenophiles.
Enough Sayers, Derek WC wrote, Wolverine Podcast is so good. Everything you say about Bone Claws is my mantra. What do we say about Bone Claws? Bone Claws suck, right? That's the consensus. Bone Claws
part of it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Richard G tweeted, love being part of the Marvel Heroes fan club. Hero on Friends. Hero on Friends. I believe that's how that should be. Jeffrey Brown wrote, I still rewatch this movie. Hey Thor, the Hulk's friend from work. He's cool as far as I'm concerned. I'm currently reading Jason Aaron and Chris Bruce's Thor, but I liked his arc in the MCU from Ragnarok to Endgame, and I'm excited to see what happens to him in Love and Thunder. Totally agree. I watched Ragnarok again last night for probably the umpteenth time.
The whole he's a friend from work thing came from a Make-A-Wish kid who was visiting the set.
Really? I never heard that. That's awesome. That's cool to have a sort of lasting legacy in the Marvel Cinematic. That's a great line. And an extremely memeable gif.
Jeffrey later added, oh yeah, I remember being excited about this movie, meaning Apocalypse, X-Men Apocalypse, when it came out. Bought it on DVD. It's kind of bad, and I was expecting the Apocalypse from the comics and the 92 X-Men animated series. I am glad to see Betsy, but I wish she had more to do and was an X-Man. They did Jubilee Dirty too. Oh yeah, and also the other things that annoyed me about this movie is how Archangel wasn't done right in this movie. He should have been blue like he was in the 92 cartoon. I know I've been talking about the cartoon a lot, but I feel like this movie could have been better.
Let me see. Randy Caldwell. I felt behind a month. It may be a regional phrase, but quote unquote dick root. I don't think it's a regional. I mean, regional maybe like
North America.
North America. If you're between the ages of 17 and whatever that demographic is, 36. I don't know. Del Dracula noted that there are Thor 1 extras on Disney Plus. They're tricky to find though. I should see if they'll hire me to be a digital usability consultant and then rope you into my A/B testing. In any case, it's better than Shudder, the other streaming service whose content enthralls me, but whose user interface leaves me screaming alone at the godless sky. And I just had a Disney Plus Shudder double feature with Loki and Caveat.
Yeah, we've trialed Shudder in the past, and like literally you can't find anything rifling through searches. You have to just find the genre you're looking for and scroll through everything they got to find anything. It's horrible. Or at least it was the last time I had it.
I find Amazon Primes to be just like it's like something that would be, what's a good way to put it, like a phone for like a 8-year-old or a 4-year-old, like a super simple like learning tablet. That's what Amazon Primes look like, and it's very frustrating. Like, I mean, maybe it's easy to find stuff. I don't know. I don't really search Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime is like the very last place I go. It's like, oh, it's on Prime when I check every other streaming service, or I'm going there specifically for a show like The Boys or whatever. But every time I open it up on the TV, I'm just like, dude, this is like years behind. It's just very plain and blah looking for a company.
I really don't have a problem with the Prime. There are other ones that I definitely have worse interactions with. I mean, I wouldn't bring Shudder into the same conversation as Prime for sure. But it also, I think it may help that all of our interfaces in recent years have been the kind where you've got a microphone. So you just say what you're looking for, and then it typically comes up without a problem. And Prime, HBO Max, Hulu, we don't tend to have any real issues with any of them. I would say that Max is the prettiest because of all the purple.
HBO Max is okay. I just find most of their shit doesn't have trailers.
Yeah, that sucks. That's irritating. Yeah.
Like, bro, I need a trailer. Like, I don't know if I want to watch this, 2-season, 10-hour-long episode show. Give me a trailer, and then I got to go out to YouTube to find a trailer for it. I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. That's what I'm saying. Like, Netflix, for all of its drawbacks, kind of has that down. Where as soon as I click on it, I can be like, here's a trailer for it. Anyway, whatever.
Netflix has the trailers, but I find that Netflix is actually typically my last resort before I go to the really bad ones. I don't know why it is, but I think that there's a lack of selection when it comes to movies. So if I'm going to Netflix, I'm usually going to something that was created for Netflix, whereas I'll go to every other streamer to try to find something that was actually released into the wild at some point, because their selection's just gotten really bad as far as movies especially.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't really know if we watch that many movies anymore, to be honest with you. Yeah, I don't go to Netflix to watch movies, like 0%. It's documentaries and docudramas and stuff like that. And I think they know that too, because they don't, have a lot of movies on there. So our next comment comes from Rian Delay. Highly enjoyable and surprisingly positive episode, fellas. Glad to hear Fryhole again. Like most of you, I was more critical of Thor when I first saw it in 2011. I found Loki more bratty than benevolent, and the Frost Giants too damn small, and I felt the tone was inconsistent. I like the movie and don't know what subgenre it was trying to be. Epic fantasy or fish out of water superhero? And it felt like it was afraid to commit one way or another. So I felt it was the weakest of the Phase 1 Marvel movies by far, though not unenjoyable. Upon rewatch years later, much like you, a lot of my criticisms were softened. There were still some nagging, why couldn't they have just done this instead moments that distracted me, but overall, I like the tone and the spirit of the performance and the humor all around. However, like Frank, it still falls in the bottom third of the MCU when I rank them all. That's not a serious knock on the film because I like all of them, but there are 16 that I like better.
Yeah, it really is a numbers game with Marvel at this point, because they've got so many fucking movies now that even the ones you're kind of cool with are going to come out seeming like they're dogs because nobody does 25 movie series, Bond, maybe that's about it.
Yeah, exactly. And eventually if there's enough good ones, even movies you enjoy still end up falling far. So it sounds bad, like, oh, it's in my bottom third. Well, it's in the bottom third of a bunch of movies you like. It's not really all that big of an insult.
Speaking of Bond, the bottom third of Bond is really fucking bad compared to Marvel especially.
Yeah. I guess I should probably binge Bond at some point and start watching some of those. How many Bond movies are there at this point?
I think they're also at 25, but it took them, 50 years to do that.
Yeah.
Finally, Debate added, rewatched First Class a few weeks ago. I still love it despite its wonky third act.
Face front, true believers. Stan Lee presents the Merry Marching Society of the Marvel Superhero Podcast.
The 108th Sage, Alejandro, Dr. Ange, Baby Skeletor, Canoes, Chris Dunford, Chris Lydon, Dave's Comic Heroes blog, Doc Strange, Dirk Ashton, Fanholes Podcast, Green Lantern HG, Gorilla Film History Now, The Hammer Strikes, Geeky Stuff and Hashtag Voiceover, History of Comics on Film, Omar de Oliveira, Hulkling, Hashtag BLM, Hashtag Mask, Hashtag GetVax, Iowa's Joe Crawford, Jason Snicked Venable, Jeffrey Brown, They Them, Keith G. Baker, King Size Comics, Giant Size Fun Podcast, Marvel Universe Online, Mohammed Bashamak, Randy Caldwell, Resurrections and Adam Warlock and Thanos Podcast, Richard G., Ronnie Casole, Tim Price the Podcrasher, Tony, Totally, Vax, Triple X Up, Scipione, Zwit Jameson, and Oofda.
This has been a non-for-profit fan production from Rolled Spine Podcast. Any copyrighted material presented herein are presumed covered under fair use, with no infringement intended.
Lift your head! You're on the winning team!
And the fact that like X-Men Apocalypse is 47%, but what is it? First Class 86. What was the other one?
Days of Future Past.
Days of Future. Where's Days of Future Past? Do they not have it on the? I'm looking at a list that ranks them all. Last Stand, X-Men United. Oh, they've had Days of Future Past. It's because it's even higher than First Class. My bad. Days of Future Past is 90%. Okay. Yeah, it's not. That's not 90%. Like 90% is better than.
And I really like Days of Future Past for a lot of it, but it ain't no 90%.
No, and okay, it's probably better than Dark Phoenix, right? I mean, it's better than Dark Phoenix.
Yeah, overall as a movie, yeah. Although it's also longer, but I do think the highs are much higher in that one for sure. Yeah.
Do we think so? Is Apocalypse better than First Class or not? We're not calling First Class the worst.
Here's the thing. Is just when you think you're out, you're back in. I want to actually do a ranking of all the X movies. Okay. So that means Deadpool, that means New Mutants, that means the whole kit and caboodle. And so that's something I would like to explore at a later time.
Okay. Well, I've now seen them all except Deadpool 2 and The Wolverine.
And New Mutants. You saw New Mutants?
No, I haven't seen New Mutants.
Yeah. And then, of course, I figure I have to rewatch a few of the favorites and, like, stuff like Logan. There's a real argument about how high up in the ranks that movie should be. So I figure maybe toward the end of the year, we'll our Christmas present will be the Ultimate X-Men Countdown.
Yeah, I've rewatched Logan fairly recently, like within the last couple years. It's still pretty good. It's pretty good. And I remember from our review, we had some hang-ups about some parts of it that were probably a little. I think we might have been a little harsher on it because at the time people were trying to get that movie a fucking award and shit, which was fucking so dumb. But there's a lot of really good in that movie. Patrick Stewart is fantastic in that movie as the fucking crazy uncle with Alzheimer's or whatever. I mean, all that shit's really, really good. And Hugh Jackman's just, of all these characters, Hugh Jackman's the best of all these actors in all these movies. So the fact that it centers around him is good, and the fact they go full violence with it, full violence where he's chopping people up and shit.
I don't know. Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix have some pretty violent imagery too, though.
Yeah, but no, for sure. And especially Phoenix. No, I'm with you on that. Well, I mean, and look, Deadpool's uber violent too. But I think it fit. Logan is such a dark movie, especially with X-24, the clone or whatever that comes out, and he's just like chopping the whole family up and shit. Remember, that movie's fucking super brutal. So yeah, I have confidence that movie's gonna hold up fairly well. If not, be better than our initial review. Because like I said, I think we were maybe coming back on that a little bit because everybody was like, "It's the best movie ever. It's better than all the Marvel movies. It's get Hugh Jackman awards. It's the best film. Oh, it was so emotional when he died and all this stuff." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sick of this." But yeah, and like I said, I gotta watch Deadpool 2. See if I can get the wife on board to watch the Deadpool movies. Brutal. She hated the last one, so I don't know. But I think she was like, just at this point, she was just doing shit on her phone. I think Apocalypse was the one where she was like, "I'm doing shit on my phone." Not paying attention, so I don't blame her.
Yeah.
We ended this podcast like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah,
right?
It's pretty much time.